Hey guys, tonight we're stepping behind the silken curtains of royal history into a space you were absolutely never meant to enter. You're about to wander into chambers where politics wore perfume and power whispered through veils. Tonight, we begin with ancient Mesopotamia, where royal girls and concubines weren't just ornamentation. They were trained, shaped, and sculpted for roles that walked the blurry edge between pleasure and politics. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this era. There are no privacy rights, no personal choices, and no, I'm not comfortable with that forms to sign. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you watching from? Drop your city and the current time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're small here, younger than you want to be. The halls smell like frankincense, resin, and something powdery, perhaps ground myrrh or the floral body paste one of the elder girls taught you to make. You're barefoot, walking across polished clay tiles so smooth they could reflect your future back at you. You pass carved doorways and low couches piled with woven textiles, and then, beyond a curtain so thin it flutters at your breath, you're pulled into a room where your real education begins. This isn't a school, not the kind with chalk and rules. This is where the women, older, sharper, and trained like diplomats, teach you the silent languages. You learn how to stand with shoulders soft and head tilted, not submissively but invitingly. You're not taught reading, you're taught reading the room. The raised brow of a eunuch, the lingering glance of a visiting noble, the twitch of the king's mouth, all are lessons in emotional algebra. You're solving for X, and X is always survival, or influence, or both. These women were raised in harems, not prisons. The word harem itself conjures fantasies now, but in reality it was more of a political greenhouse. Within these quarters, segregated from male eyes unless summoned, girls and women were trained in language, dance, grooming, scent, and behaviour. Some would remain behind curtains forever, others would rise. At the core of this is sex, yes, but not in the blunt modern sense. You're being trained to wield desire like a diplomat wields rhetoric. You learn how a glance can anchor a treaty, how a whisper can turn the tide of succession, and above all, how to make a man feel like he's the one in control, even when he isn't. You watch older girls oil their hair with crushed petals and comb it into soft waves. You learn how to scent your wrists so that even a wave goodbye leaves a trail behind. You're taught the language of scent long before you're taught anything else. Amber for mystery, rose for innocence, musk for something you're not supposed to understand yet, but you will. At night you sit in a circle of aloe lamps. A teacher, an older concubine who was once the favourite, tells you about posture. No elbows on knees, she says gently but firmly. Heels together, back soft, not stiff. You're not a statue, you're a suggestion. You don't know what that means yet, but you file it away. And yes, there are lessons in the erotic. The temple girls in the house of Ishtar, those mysterious priestesses you heard about from a maid, sometimes visit to teach certain arts. But it's spiritual, they say, sacred. You're not just learning to touch, you're learning how touch can be holy, powerful, disarming. You don't giggle, even though you want to. The mood is too serious. The girls who laugh don't stay long. One of the girls, the one with the darkest eyes you've ever seen, tells you that sometimes power flows backward. If he wants you, you get things, she says, examining her polished fingernails. But if he loves you, you get everything. She's not wrong. The Queen Mother rose this way through silken wit. Everyone knows it. No one says it. Quirky fact. There are coded embroidery patterns here. Some stitches in a girl's robe hint at her skills, preferences, or status within the harem. You're told never to wear a lotus unless you've been chosen. One girl forgets, and she's gone the next morning. No one talks about it. Her perfume lingers for days. At the edges of all this training you glimpse the scribes. Men in long robes, eyes cast down, recording everything for the palace archives. They're not supposed to look at you, and yet, you feel their gaze. You ask your mentor, and she tells you softly, even the ones who don't touch will write your life. Be careful what story you let them tell. Some scholars debate how extensive this training really was. Were all royal girls taught the same seductive arts? Or were only the elite few groomed for politics, while others were essentially ornamental? The tablets, when we find them, are vague. The stories handed down are half-truth, half-fable. What is clear, though, is that girls in royal Mesopotamian courts were not left to wander blindly into adulthood. They were curated. You spend hours practicing how to walk across a room without making a sound. You learn to pour wine without spilling a drop. You're taught not just to speak, but when to speak, and how even your silence can speak for you. One hand on your lap, the other near your throat, breathing slowly. The older girls test you, not cruelly, but constantly. And finally, there's the dream you're not supposed to say out loud, that if you do all of this perfectly, if your body becomes a temple and your voice a song, you might be chosen. Not just as a lover, but as a wife, a queen, a mother of kings. Of course, most girls aren't. Most fade into background stories, but you still hold the dream. And tonight you sleep with coal still on your lashes, because beauty isn't just performance here, it's protection. The scent of the temple is thicker than the palace, smoke-heavy and sweet, clinging to your skin like a second layer. Tonight, you're brought not to your usual chamber, but to the outer sanctum of the Temple of Ishtar, goddess of love, war, fertility, and the most confusing feelings in your young mind. The torches along the walls flicker like heartbeats, their shadows dancing on the carved reliefs of goddesses mid-embrace, hips swayed, fingers entwined in someone else's fate. This is where the sacred girls train, not for kings or courtiers, but for the goddess herself. The women here are different. They don't wear the perfumes of the court. Their scent is earthier, like spices warmed on a brazier, and oils pressed from fruits you can't name. Their voices are low, melodic, edged with something that makes you stand straighter. You're not sure if it's fear or awe, maybe both, and maybe that's the point. The priestess who welcomes you wears a layered robe that flows like water. She carries a staff, carved with the figure of a lioness. You can't look her in the eye for long, it's like staring at the sun. Tonight's lesson isn't posture or grooming. Tonight, you're learning about sacred intimacy. They don't call it sex here. It's something else, something older. They call it 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓎, the sacred marriage. According to legend, every spring a priestess of Ishtar would lie with the king in ritual union, acting out the goddess's embrace. It wasn't just theatre, it was divine duty. The people believed their crops, their peace, even their children's births depended on this union. No pressure. You sit in a circle with other girls. Some are from the palace harem like you. Others belong to the temple, trained from birth to serve Ishtar through body and spirit. They teach you songs, soft winding melodies in a language older than yours. Each word has multiple meanings, some innocent, some not. You repeat them with care. They tell you that to sing well is to summon both love and luck. You wonder if any of the kings ever really listened to the words, or if they just watched your lips move. One of the more surreal lessons comes from an older temple woman with silver-threaded braids and a face that's both stern and kind. She lays out a set of figurines on a low table. Clay, weathered, some missing limbs. Each one shows a different position, a different kind of closeness. You blush. You stare. She does not flinch. This is not shameful, she tells you. This is your instrument. You must know it like a priest knows his prayers. The figurines are real. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds in ancient Mesopotamian sites. Some are shockingly explicit, others stylized, symbolic. Were they training aids? Ritual objects? Offerings? Scholars still debate their use. Some claim these were visual tools for instructing temple girls and royal concubines in the divine arts. Others argue they were more about fertility magic than human interaction. But as the older woman turns the figurine slowly in the firelight, you can't help but feel the truth is both. Or neither. Or something in between. You spend days here. You learn how to mix oils, not just for scent, but for sensation. You're taught how to breathe in rhythm with another person, how to synchronize your heartbeat to theirs through touch and timing. One lesson involves feeding someone with your hands, grapes, figs, dates, without speaking. Let your eyes talk, the instructor says. You try and fail and try again. The other girls giggle, but the laughter isn't cruel. You're all ridiculous and brave and terrified together. Quirky fact. Ishtar was often depicted with lions and doves, two animals at opposite ends of the temperament scale. One devours, the other coos. The priestesses say that you too must learn when to be each. A royal girl must be a dove in the courtyard, a lioness in the bedchamber, one of them tells you. The phrase stays lodged in your mind like a thorn or a blessing. Maybe both. At night, when you lie on the cool stone floor of your chamber, your body tingling from massage oils and too many conflicting thoughts, you wonder what this training is preparing you for, really. Will it make you powerful, desired, or just more valuable to someone who already has everything? The other girls fall asleep quickly, their breathing deep and even. You stay awake, watching a tiny crack of moonlight inch across the ceiling like a slow-moving prophecy. Not everything is comfortable. Some girls leave crying. One refuses to return after a lesson involving breath control and sensory discipline. Another runs back to the palace and won't speak for 3 days. You're told not everyone is suited for the path. Some are meant to serve through silence and embroidery. Others, perhaps you, through intimacy and intelligence. Your body is your scripture, a temple woman whispers to you once while smoothing your hair. But only if you read it first. Scholars today still wrestle with the meaning of sacred sexuality in ancient Mesopotamia. Some insist these practices were empowering, a form of spiritual agency for women in a patriarchal world. Others argue it was exploitation, disguised as divine purpose. You don't know what to believe. You're too close to it. All you know is that in this temple, the rules are ancient, and they're not asking for your opinion. As you prepare to leave the temple and return to the palace, the head priestess gives you a gift. A small vial of scented oil and a bronze mirror. The oil is for your skin, she says. The mirror is for your mind. You're too polite to ask what she means. Later, in the palace, you'll look into that mirror and try to see what she saw in you. Power, maybe. Or just another girl hoping to be more than decoration. The next morning you walk through the palace halls with a new kind of stillness. Not fear, not pride. Just awareness. You know things now, things you can't unlearn. You catch a nobleman's glance and return it. Not coyly, not boldly, but deliberately. He looks away first. You keep walking. By the time you reach the banks of the Nile, something inside you has settled. Not innocence. No, that was left behind with the temple smoke, but awareness. Egypt feels different the moment you arrive. The air is damp, sweet with river reeds and blooming lotus, and the palace rises like a sun-bleached dream carved in stone. Here, everything is brighter, louder, more openly divine. You're told immediately that this court does not hide its intentions behind veils. In Egypt, beauty is policy, and the body, yours included, is part of the state's aesthetic order. You're brought into the women's quarters of the palace, a place perfumed constantly, not to seduce but to please the gods. That's the official line anyway. The floors are cool limestone painted with blues and golds that catch the light. Servants move like water around you, adjusting jewellery, smoothing linen, murmuring instructions. You're no longer trained to disappear into shadows. Here, you're trained to be seen, correctly. The first lesson surprises you. It isn't about desire at all. It's about cleanliness, bathing, oiling, exfoliating with fine sand and milk. Egyptian court girls are expected to be immaculate, because purity here is not just moral, it's visual and ritual. A clean body is a godly body. You're taught how often to bathe, which oils to use at which times of day, and how to shave every trace of hair from your skin. Smoothness is considered civilized. Body hair is chaos. Older women oversee this process with almost scientific attention. They inspect nails, teeth, skin tone, not cruelly, but clinically. You represent order, one matron tells you, and order must be maintained. You learn that even scent is regulated. Certain perfumes are worn during festivals, others are reserved for private audiences. Some are forbidden entirely to girls who have not yet been presented at court. Cosmetics become your next curriculum. Kohl is not just makeup, it's protection, believed to ward off illness and the evil eye. You learn how to grind malachite and galena, how to line your eyes to make them appear elongated and divine, echoing the eye of Horus. Lips are stained with crushed insects and berries. Cheeks are warmed with red ochre. This is not about looking tempting. It's about looking eternal. Historical fact. Egyptian women, especially in elite circles, had more legal rights than their counterparts in many other ancient societies. They could own property, initiate divorce, and inherit wealth. That reality shapes your training. You're not being prepared solely as someone's possession. You're being shaped as a visible extension of royal legitimacy. A well-trained courtwoman reflects well on the pharaoh himself. Dance lessons follow, not wild, not theatrical, measured symbolic movements designed to echo temple rituals. Your wrists rotate like opening flowers. Your steps trace patterns that mirror the Nile's flow. Music, harps, flutes, soft drums, sets a hypnotic rhythm. You're told that movement teaches discipline. It also teaches how to hold attention without demanding it. The best dancers, you're told, make the room lean toward them without realizing why. Quirky fact: some Egyptian dancers wore scented cones of wax on their heads that slowly melted during performances, releasing perfume as they moved. You try one once. It drips warm oil down your hair and neck, and you have to keep dancing as if nothing strange is happening. Control, you learn, is everything. There is, of course, instruction about intimacy, but it is indirect, almost academic. Older women speak in metaphors, referencing gods and myths rather than bodies. The story of Isis and Osiris is repeated often. Devotion, reunion, restoration. You're taught that closeness, when it comes, is meant to reinforce harmony, not indulgence. Whether that's how it actually plays out is another matter. You also learn silence, when to lower your gaze, when to meet someone's eyes. Egyptian court life is full of watching and being watched. Servants gossip, officials report, priests interpret everything. A poorly timed smile can become a rumour by sundown. So you practice neutrality, pleasant, composed, unreadable. It's harder than dancing. There is scholarly debate about how formalised this training truly was. Some historians argue that much of what we imagine, structured grooming for intimacy, is exaggerated by later Greek and Roman writers fascinated with Egypt's sensual reputation. Others point to tomb paintings, cosmetic tools, and instructional texts as evidence of deliberate preparation. Standing here, holding a bronze mirror etched with gods, you suspect the truth lives somewhere in between image and intention. At night, you lie beneath linen sheets, listening to the distant sounds of the palace. Laughter, music, the splash of fountains. You think of the temple of Ishtar, of shadows and whispers. Egypt is brighter, but the stakes feel higher. Here, you are not hidden, you are displayed, and that means every lesson you absorb will be tested in the open. By morning, your skin smells faintly of lotus. Your eyes are lined just enough to catch the sun. You walk a little differently now, not heavier, not lighter, but with the awareness that in this court, beauty is not decoration, it is alignment. And you are being aligned, carefully, for whatever role the river of fate carries you toward next. You wake before dawn, not because anyone tells you to, but because the palace breathes differently in the early hours. The air is damp, thick with the perfume of night-blooming jasmine and the faintest trace of yesterday's incense. A distant water carrier's footsteps echo through the colonnades, and you rise quietly, slipping into the silk wrap you've been trained to adjust just so, barely fastened, artfully accidental. Another day of lessons begins, and here in Egypt those lessons aren't always scheduled. Sometimes they arrive in glances, in pauses, in the space between one sentence and the next. This morning's instructor isn't the usual polished court matron. Instead, she's one of the older concubines, barely still in favour, but clever enough to have kept her place well into her 40s. She's draped in linen so sheer it dares the eye to look away, and she walks with a slow, deliberate grace that draws your gaze like a tide. Today, she says, you'll learn how to listen when no one is speaking. You think she's joking, she's not. She leads you through the women's quarters, past younger girls practicing dances and older women gossiping as they sort rose petals. You enter a room filled with polished copper mirrors and trays of pigments. You already know how to paint your face, she says. Now you'll learn how to wear emotion like makeup. You sit, and she begins. You must know when to smile, not for joy, but for strategy. You must learn to frown with just your eyes when he offends you. Raise one brow when you're intrigued, both when you're annoyed, but never too high. Too high means hysteria, and they fear that more than rage. She leans in, inspecting your expression like a sculptor working clay. No teeth when you smile. Innocence, not hunger. You think you've already learned these things, but not like this, not with this level of precision. You begin to understand that the royal court isn't a place where people act naturally. It's theatre. Every gesture, every look is a performance designed to survive, seduce, or both. You're no longer simply a girl in training. You're an actress studying the role of a lifetime, one you may have to play until your dying breath. Later you're brought to a private garden, walled, quiet, almost forgotten. This is where one of the older princesses lives now. She was once a favourite, they whisper, until she wasn't. She tends to herbs and birds now, speaking rarely but watching everything. You're told she's going to teach you poetry, not to write it, to recite it, to make it live inside your voice. She chooses verses by court bards, some gentle, some erotic, some devastating. A girl who can read the right poem at the right moment, she says, is more dangerous than one with a dagger. You sit on soft cushions and practice the cadence of your voice. She corrects you when your tone is too bright, when your pauses are too short. You're rushing, she scolds gently. Seduction is never in a hurry. The fringe detail. Some poems in ancient Egypt were tattooed discreetly on women's bodies, lines of love or praise or desire inked along the ribs or thighs, hidden under linen, revealed only in intimacy. You hear rumours of one dancer whose inner thigh bore a verse that made a general weep. You're never told exactly what it said, which of course makes it more powerful. Your days blur into rhythm, dance, diction, silence, scent. Some lessons are repeated until your muscles ache. You're corrected when your hands tremble while pouring wine. You're praised when you hold a glance a second longer than is comfortable. This is how you become fluent in a language with no words, and yet there are still rules. Some things are never taught directly. You ask one night, softly, cautiously, about what happens after a girl is chosen. The woman you ask stiffens. That is not a lesson, she says. That is an event. You survive it as you survive everything else. Then she turns back to her embroidery, and you know not to press further. One night you're summoned to a private banquet, not as a participant but as an observer. You sit behind a screen, unseen, watching noblewomen and concubines entertain visiting dignitaries. There's music, soft laughter, the clinking of wine cups. One girl dances while balancing a bowl of lotus blossoms on her head. Another recites a verse that makes a man clutch his chest in faux agony. And yet another simply sits, silent, sipping from her goblet, her eyes doing all the work. She's the one they watch the most. Scholars still argue about the Egyptian harem system, how it functioned, how much autonomy the women had, how real their influence was. Some claim that behind every pharaoh was a woman who pulled strings he didn't even know existed. Others insist it was just ceremonial, that women were there to look beautiful, bear sons, and stay quiet. But you've seen too much to believe in silence now. You've heard the poetry, seen the glances, learned the way a single breath can shift the power in a room. By now you've mastered the art of sitting still with purpose. When you walk, you glide. When you speak, you lower your voice. One of the senior women compliments your restraint, which in this world is the highest praise. You're told you may be presented to the court soon. You say nothing, but inside, a tide rises. The final lesson of the day comes just before bed, and it's whispered by a girl barely older than you, recently chosen, still radiant from the attention but trembling underneath. She leans close and says, "Don't forget who you are before you're touched. Remember that version. You'll need her later." You lie awake for a long time that night, eyes tracing the flickering shadows on your wall, wondering how many of the girls in this palace remembered themselves, or if they became only what the court trained them to be, beautiful reflections with no voice of their own. It's morning again, and now the sky feels wider, the sun less curious. You've begun to understand that palace life is not a straight path. It coils, loops, and folds back on itself like a snake beneath silk. One day you're praised for stillness, the next scolded for not being vivid enough. You live between contradictions. Be modest but unforgettable, be pure but aware, be obedient but never dull. And now you're being sent westward, across the Mediterranean, into a world where girls learn these things differently. Athens is calling. You expect marble and you get it, white, polished, gleaming. But what you don't expect is how little space women are allowed to take up. Here, femininity is tightly controlled, boxed behind wooden doors and heavy curtains. Athenian noble girls are raised in the women's quarters of the oikos, the household, far from male eyes, far from anything resembling courtly performance. Their lives are structured around weaving, cooking, and, mostly, waiting. The silence here is not ceremonial, it's survival. You're introduced to a young woman not much older than you, dressed in layered linen, hair braided like ivy vines. She welcomes you with polite reserve. This is her life, and you're here to learn its edges. She explains that in Athens, being too visible is considered a failure of breeding. The more they see you, she says with a shrug, the less they want you. Your training shifts dramatically. You're no longer practicing seduction, but restraint. You watch how Athenian girls lower their eyes, speak only when addressed, and never linger in a room where a man might enter. It's frustrating. You feel yourself fading like a flower pressed between pages. But then, one evening, she shows you the hidden part. There's a story passed quietly between girls here, told in hushed tones while combing each other's hair. It's about Aspasia, not a wife, not even Athenian, but a courtesan, a hetera. And unlike most women, she was educated, witty, admired. She even lived with Pericles, the most powerful man in the city. Some say she debated philosophers. Others say she ran a salon of women too smart to be wives. Suddenly the cracks in this rigid world become doorways. You begin to hear about the heterae, a separate class of women trained in art, philosophy and conversation. They attend symposia, reclining beside poets and generals, offering not just beauty but intellect. They are not wives, they are not property. They are something else, something feared and envied in equal measure. You don't meet one directly, of course. That would be scandalous. But you catch glimpses, and your imagination stitches the rest together. You ask your host if she ever considered that path. She pauses, the comb frozen mid-stroke. We're not raised to choose, she says. We're raised to accept. But her voice lingers on the word choose, as if it tastes better than the rest. The city outside the household is alive with movement. Men gather in the agora, argue in the assembly, drink wine in private gatherings you'll never be allowed to attend. The only time you see one up close, he doesn't look at you directly. You realise your training here isn't about preparation, it's about disappearance. And yet, there's something subversive happening. You start to notice the coded language in the girls' weaving patterns, meander motifs that twist endlessly, eyes that wink from amphory. The domestic sphere is not dead, it's just quiet. And inside that quiet, girls learn their own kinds of power. Not overt, not spoken, but there. Historical fact. In classical Athens, girls married young, often around 14, to men twice their age or more. Their virginity was treated as a literal transaction, and dowries were discussed like livestock. But unlike the sacred sexuality of Mesopotamia, or the polished performance of Egypt, Athenian girls were taught to be invisible until the wedding day. And even then, they were expected to fade further into their husband's world, a shadow behind his public image. Still, fringe stories survive, of women who broke the mould. There's the tale of Phryne, the famed courtesan who was so beautiful that when accused of impiety, she simply disrobed in court and was acquitted. Not because she argued well, but because her body was considered a divine argument on its own. You try to imagine that kind of confidence, or that kind of power. There's debate among scholars about how separate Athenian women's lives truly were. Some suggest that lower-class women had far more freedom, working in markets, managing businesses, while elite girls lived in decorative exile. Others argue that we've romanticised the heterae too much, turning them into proto-feminist icons when in reality, they too were often at the mercy of the men who funded their lives. But again, standing here, weaving yet another patterned border, you suspect both stories hold truth. Your training here is quieter, more mental. You're learning how to be forgettable when necessary, how to carry intelligence folded within submission. You practice serving wine with downcast eyes, saying little, revealing nothing. You're taught how to listen, not just to words, but to what's missing. The pauses, the hesitations. You're not being shaped into a seductress, you're being shaped into a ghost. And yet, something in you resists. Maybe it's the memory of the priestess with her lion-headed staff, or the Egyptian dancer with perfume melting down her neck. You remember what it felt like to be seen. Here, you're expected to vanish. But you begin to wonder if it's possible to vanish on your own terms, not as surrender, as strategy. The Athenian girl hugs you goodbye when you leave, a quiet, careful gesture with nothing casual in it. She leans in close and whispers, "If you learn how to make them underestimate you, you win before the game begins." Then she steps back and returns to her loom, the soft rhythm of thread resuming behind you as you walk away. The first time you hear the word hetera spoken with respect, not scorn, it's in the hills above Athens, at a private villa hidden behind olive trees and discreet stone walls. You've been sent here not as a noble daughter or royal ward, but as a quiet observer, one of the girls from the court who watches and listens more than she speaks. The woman waiting for you isn't a priestess or a queen, she's a teacher, but not the kind with scrolls and dusty sandals. She wears her knowledge like silk, draped softly over a frame shaped by deliberate choices. Her name is 𝒮𝓈𝓉𝓐, and her smile is subtle, as if it were trained out of her and then invited back by sheer force of will. She was once the companion of a famed playwright, maybe even several. Her fame outlived theirs, which tells you something. She doesn't bow when you enter. She waits until you sit. Then she begins. You've already been taught how to hide, she says, how to be looked at, how to control a room without being blamed for it. That's good, but now you'll learn how to speak. The other girls in the room, some your age, some older, watch you with polite curiosity. You're one of many, here to study the art of being a 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝓐, though no one calls it that out loud. What you're really here to learn is the most dangerous skill in the ancient world, how to turn conversation into currency. 𝒮𝓈𝓉𝓐 starts with words, Greek of course, but also tone, pace, the space between thoughts. She teaches you to use silence the way others use perfume. Never rush a reply, she instructs, her voice smooth as marble. Let them think your answer is being considered. Let them want it before they get it. She pauses. Or deny it. That's even more effective. Your days here aren't about physical beauty. You already know how to carry yourself. This is about sharpening. Reading texts aloud until your voice bends into poetry. Debating with the other girls over questions of ethics and myth. Laughing at the right time, not too quickly, not too loudly. It's not flirtation, it's finesse. One afternoon, you're given a scroll of Sappho's verses and asked to recite your favourite line. You choose one about longing. Everyone does. Longing is the shared language here. The woman across from you, taller, older, sharp-eyed, recites the same line but emphasises different syllables. It changes everything. Now do it as if you're in love, 𝒮𝓈𝓉𝓐 says. You do. Now as if you're lying. You try again. Now as if you're bored. The room erupts into quiet laughter. You're starting to see how much power lives in delivery. Quirky fact. Some 𝒮𝓗𝓚 were paid not in coins, but in land, jewels or political favours. Their influence reached far beyond the bedroom, into courtrooms, theatres, even war councils. You learn about one woman, Lais of Corinth, who charged so much for her company that only the wealthiest men could afford her, and even they were often turned away. She once refused a general, then wrote a poem about his ego. It ruined him. There's an open debate among the girls about the line between education and transaction. One asks 𝒮𝓚, if we're so intelligent, so respected, why can't we vote? Why can't we own citizenship? 𝒮𝓚's answer is quiet but firm. Because you can move power without holding it. Because your power is deniable. That's what makes it dangerous. The room goes still. You write it down in your mind. You begin to understand how the best 𝒻𝒾𝓚 aren't merely companions. They're mirrors, showing powerful men the version of themselves they most want to see. You practice telling stories where your questions are more important than your answers. You learn how to ask, "And what did you do?" in 17 different tones. Each tone implies something different. Each tone tells a man who he is, without telling him anything at all. There's a quiet night when 𝒮𝓚 shares her own first lesson. She was barely 13, called to a banquet where older girls had taught her everything. How to serve wine, how to smile without showing teeth. But she didn't speak. Not once. At the end of the night, one man leaned in and said, "She listens like a widow." He gave her 3 silver rings. That's when I knew silence was the most expensive thing I owned. Outside the villa, Athens is still buzzing with rhetoric and revolution, philosophers asking questions no one wants real answers to. But here, in the hush of twilight under olive trees, you're learning that philosophy doesn't only happen on marble steps. It happens between 2 people, in a garden, in the dark, with a jug of wine and a game of unspoken truths. Some scholars today argue that the romanticised image of the 𝒻𝒾𝓚 is just that, romanticised. They say these women were glorified escorts, educated only as much as needed to flatter their clients. Others defend them as some of the most autonomous women in the ancient world, masters of their own fate in a system built to contain them. You've seen enough now to know that both may be true. It depends on who's telling the story. and who's allowed to finish it. Your final lesson comes not from 𝒮𝓗𝓉𝓉, but from one of the girls you've been training beside, Callista, with her ink-stained fingers and a laugh like clinking glass. She says, "The trick is never letting them know whether they're buying your time or your attention. Make them guess. Make them grateful." Then she ties her hair back and disappears into the evening, summoned to some private feast you're not yet old enough to attend. You watch her go, wondering when your time will come. Not to entertain, to be asked. To be chosen not for obedience or beauty, but for the rarest trait of all, intrigue. The wind changes. You feel it before the boat even docks. Rome doesn't rise out of the earth the way Athens did. It surges, chest out, teeth bared, all marble and ambition. The palaces are taller, the streets louder, and the men louder still. You've arrived at the height of the Republic turned empire, and everything here feels like it's been overbuilt. Statues too tall, appetites too large, egos far too swollen to fit inside a single man. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for you. It just means you have to be sharper, quieter, and paradoxically more dangerous than ever before. You're placed in the household of a senator's wife, a broad-shouldered woman with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper tongue. She sizes you up immediately, not with cruelty, just calculation. You're a new piece in her domestic strategy, one more girl to be shaped into something respectable, useful, and, if the gods are generous, marriageable. You learn quickly that Roman girls are trained not for delight but for duty. Here everything begins with 𝒮𝓗𝓃𝑔, that Roman ideal of modesty and sexual virtue. Virginity isn't just preferred, it's a public matter, a performance of civic morality. Your hymen, they imply, belongs to the state. You're a symbol before you're even a person. Chastity is armour, the senator's wife tells you, not just against shame, but against being forgotten. You nod, even though you're starting to suspect it's also a kind of leash. Your training revolves around appearances, how to dress in stoli that drape with studied effortlessness, how to veil your hair just enough to hint at your modesty without hiding your beauty. You're taught to walk slowly, speak softly, and laugh even more softly than that. One wrong giggle could change your marriage prospects entirely. That's not hyperbole, it's a daily threat. But beneath the marble columns and virtue rhetoric, there's a strange duplicity at play. Because while noble girls are taught to be paragons of restraint, the world around you is anything but restrained. You hear whispers of private banquets, of mistresses installed in countryside villas, of wives who poison their husbands with herbs from Syria because they're tired of being footnotes. You start to understand that virtue is often a mask worn to church, then hung by the door on the way to the bedroom. There's a different kind of education happening here, one you're not formally enrolled in, but which finds you anyway. You hear it in the stories shared by servants behind the curtain. You catch glimpses of it in the sideways glances between matrons and their so-called brothers. At dinner, one guest tells a joke about 𝒾𝓈𝓉𝓉, the woman who killed herself after being raped to preserve her family's honour. Everyone laughs too quickly. You don't. Not because you don't understand. Because you do. Historical fact. 𝒾𝓈𝓉𝓉's death sparked the revolution that led to the fall of the Roman monarchy and the rise of the Republic. Her chastity, even in death, was seen as more valuable than her life. She became a political symbol, used by men for centuries to argue about female virtue, never mind what she might have wanted for herself. You begin to realise that Roman girls are trained to weaponise chastity. It's not just a value, it's a currency. A girl rumoured to be untouched is worth more in the marriage market. Dowries inflate based on whispers. Your name becomes a kind of stock, rising or falling with every stolen glance or unguarded moment. But even here, there's a secret undercurrent. Some girls are prepared differently, not for marriage, but for manoeuvring. These are the ones born to power, daughters of emperors, sisters of generals. They're trained to smile sweetly at statues while counting the real weapons in the room. One of them, Livia, yes, that Livia, is talked about in hushed tones. Wife of Augustus, mother of emperors, suspected poisoner of rivals. You learn that she wasn't just trained to be a wife, she was trained to be irreplaceable. There's a moment you'll never forget. A private lesson, just you and the senator's wife. She closes the door, pours herself a goblet of wine and says, "What I'm about to teach you, you won't find in any scroll." She teaches you how to write a love letter, but not to send it. No, the goal is to have it found. Misplaced, accidentally, discovered by the right person, read and reread, until it becomes a rumour with its own momentum. Seduction, she says, begins in the mind, but scandal? That's where power blooms. Quirky fact. Some Roman women trained their slaves to memorise romantic verses and recite them aloud as they passed by potential lovers. It was flirtation by proxy, a performance of longing that allowed plausible deniability. You try it once, and though the man doesn't turn his head, you see his ears pinken. That's enough. Scholars still debate how much agency Roman noblewomen actually had. Some argue they were merely symbolic tools, valuable only for their wombs and connections. Others point to letters, wills, and inscriptions that hint at private influence, quiet manipulation, and even direct political manoeuvring. You start to see the invisible web behind the togas, the ones spun by women who never got statues but pulled the strings that moved them. Your days continue in a rhythm of restraint, embroidering with tiny, perfect stitches, attending temple ceremonies with your veil just right, and smiling at boys you're told are good matches. You meet one, Marcus, a son of some senator, dull as wet parchment, and practice the art of pretending to care about aqueducts. He holds your hand like it's a scroll he's afraid to tear, and yet a small part of you begins to enjoy the game. Not the pretending, but the knowing. You understand the stakes, you understand the performance, and you start to get good at it. You laugh at the right moments, blush on cue, withdraw just enough to be pursued but not enough to seem cold. It's exhausting. It's intoxicating. It's everything they told you to be and none of who you really are. One night, a maid slips into your room and hands you a small bronze mirror, polished to near perfection. "From the mistress," she says. On the back is etched a single word, memory. I remember. You don't know what it means at first, but later, staring into your own reflection, you realise this training, this performance, this weaponized purity, it all comes down to remembering who you were before the marble walls and embroidered lies, remembering what you choose to become despite them. The banquet begins before sunset, but you can already feel the heat rising like steam from the stone floors, carrying with it the scent of citrus, roasted meat, and wine spiced until it bites. You're not a guest, not officially, but you're dressed like one. A borrowed stola, a woven belt cinched to hint without revealing, your hair arranged to look like you woke up perfect. You did not. 3 women twisted, coiled, and pinned it for nearly an hour, and now, with a silver cup in your hand and your sandals barely making a sound, you're learning what no scroll or tutor has yet taught you. How Roman girls are truly prepared for life beyond the curtained confines of home, when the training stops being a lesson and becomes a performance. This isn't an ordinary dinner, it's a convivium, a party of politics and pleasure, half statecraft, half theatre. You're placed just outside the inner circle, seated between 2 women who pretend not to know each other. Across the room, a nobleman with a jaw like carved marble stares too long at a serving girl. A bard strums a lyre. A juggler drops a cup and gets laughed at. Everything is staged, even the chaos. You watch carefully. This is your first real chance to see the rules of your training in motion. One girl, barely older than you, leans into her partner, her fingers trailing the rim of her wine cup with such subtle rhythm you'd miss it if you blinked. Another one, seated farther away, laughs too loudly at a senator's joke, then quickly folds herself into silence. You mark her as inexperienced. It's always the laughter that betrays the new ones, and then you see her, a woman who looks like she belongs in a fresco, reclining on a cushion with perfect stillness. She's older, 30, maybe more, and her face is unreadable, but the way the room orbits around her, how men and women both seem to glance in her direction before speaking, tells you everything. She's not married, at least not anymore. That's what the whispers say. And yet, she holds power in the way she lifts a fig to her mouth, slowly, deliberately, like time itself obeys her. You ask quietly who she is. The woman beside you leans in. That's Domitia, once a mistress, now a broker of favours, knows every secret in Rome. She can ruin a man with a look. She says it like a warning, but you hear it like a goal. As the evening deepens, the line between behaviour and flirtation begins to blur. Some of the women present as wives, dressed in conservative folds and stiff gold. Others, possibly mistresses or courtesans, wear brighter dyes, softer fabrics, and looser laughter. You start to realise that Roman court training was never about making a girl pure. It was about making her adaptable. One face for the forum, another for the feast. Historical fact. While Roman society outwardly glorified modesty, Roman banquets were famously decadent. They often included drinking games, erotic poetry recitals, and private performances that blurred lines between art and arousal. These gatherings served dual purposes: diplomatic bonding and discreet matchmaking. For girls in training, they were less about indulgence and more about observation. This is where alliances formed, where futures were whispered into motion over honeyed wine. You're offered a piece of melon from a man whose toga costs more than a farm. You take it, slowly. You don't meet his eyes, but you feel them anyway. You're not allowed to speak freely, but your silence is no longer powerless. It's become suggestion, possibility, a promise that might be broken, or not. The fact that they don't know is the point. Your mentor catches your eye from across the room. Just a glance. No smile, but you know what it means. You're doing well. No mistakes, no slips. Not yet. Still, there are dangers. A young girl nearby drinks too quickly, laughs too brightly, leans too far toward a man old enough to be her grandfather. She's trying, but the balance is off. You can feel it. Later, you'll hear that her mother received a letter the next morning, suggesting the girl be sent away for a while, somewhere quieter, somewhere less seen. Fringe fact: it wasn't uncommon for noble Roman families to send their daughters away to the countryside, or even to small temples for moral correction, if their behaviour became too noticeable. Sometimes it was punishment, other times strategic hiding. In either case, visibility was currency, and a girl who couldn't manage hers became a liability. The scholar in you, that small voice that still remembers poetry lessons and temple incense, wonders if all this is sustainable, if a life lived in half glances and loaded silences can lead anywhere but exhaustion. But another part of you, the one watching Demisha as she moves through the room like smoke, knows the truth. Visibility is power. Controlled visibility is survival. As the banquet fades into candlelight and half-finished songs, the host proposes a game. Each guest must describe their perfect lover, using only metaphor. The men go first. Predictable nonsense about lions, fire, oceans, and ripe fruit. When it's the women's turn, most stay quiet, smiling politely, passing their turn like a hot coal. But Demisha speaks. "My lover is a locked door with no key," she says. "He does not open, and I do not knock." Silence. Then a ripple of laughter, unsure, uneasy. Even the host seems startled. She raises her cup, drinks. The game ends with no winner. Later, as you walk back through the halls of the villa, your mentor asks you what you thought of the night. You choose your words carefully. "I learned that being desired is not the same as being valued." She stops walking, looks at you for a long moment. "Good," she says. "Now learn how to make them confuse the two." You sleep that night with your earrings still in, too tired to remove them, too wired to rest. You think of the girl who leaned too far, of the man with the melon, of Demisha and her door. You think of yourself, perfectly quiet in the middle of the noise, and you wonder, not for the first time, whether all this training is building a person, or unmaking one. There are 6 Vestal virgins in Rome at any given time. You only ever see 2. One passes through the marketplace once a week, flanked by guards and priestesses, her hair wound into thick braids, her robe blindingly white. The other you glimpse through a temple arch, standing still as marble near the sacred fire of Vesta. You're told it has never gone out in her lifetime. If it does, it means Rome is dying. No pressure. Your new lessons begin in the shadow of that flame. Not within the temple, outsiders aren't permitted there, but in the guest quarters, where you're sent to observe restraint. At first, it feels like punishment. You've spent weeks learning how to perform, how to suggest, how to weaponize even your pauses. But here, silence isn't a trick. It's a sentence. You're assigned to a former Vestal, not disgraced, just retired. That happens after 30 years of service. Her name is Servia, and she speaks the way most people exhale. Quiet, unhurried, without apology. She's the opposite of everything the Roman banquets taught you. There's no eyeliner, no dance, no linen dyed to flatter your skin tone. Just long hours of sitting, kneeling, and learning how to be still without wanting to scream. The Vestals, Servia explains, are chosen before puberty. Their entire education is abstinence. Not just from sex, but from vanity, ambition, noise, spontaneity. Their bodies are sworn to the goddess, their presence required for major state rituals, and their punishment, if they ever break their vow, is brutal. Live burial. No exceptions. Historical fact. If a Vestal virgin was found to have violated her vow of chastity, she was buried alive in a chamber with a loaf of bread and a lamp, technically not executed by the state, since no one could spill the blood of a sacred woman. This loophole made the whole thing even more terrifying. You can't stop thinking about that lamp flickering in the dark. Servia says she never broke her vow. You believe her. There's something in her gaze, detached, patient, immune to flattery, that tells you she survived the system by becoming something colder than fear. You don't envy her, but you respect her. Still, she teaches you. Not with poetry or music, but with quiet rituals. How to light a lamp without spilling oil. How to enter and exit a room without drawing attention. How to wait without fidgeting. To sit in perfect posture for an hour without letting your mind betray you. These things sound pointless until you realize they're tests of control. You're learning to own yourself. Not for others, for you. One day she places a small mirror in your hand. Not for makeup. Look, she says, you do. Now sit until you no longer react to what you see. That takes longer than it should. There's a strange freedom in this restraint. Without perfume, no one comments on your scent. Without jewellery, no one asks your worth. Without speaking, you're not expected to entertain. For the first time in weeks, you find yourself thinking instead of performing. Remembering, processing. And under all the layers of practice and polish, you find a girl who still wants to know things, wants to be something. And yet, despite the calm, there are rules you must never break. Vestals are sacred, yes, but also watched. You learn quickly that too much curiosity is dangerous. One afternoon, you ask Servia if she ever missed being touched. She doesn't answer. She just stands up and leaves the room. You don't see her for 2 days. Quirky fact. Vestals had seats of honour at gladiator games and public events, and even the emperor was expected to treat them with respect. But some records suggest they were also used as political pawns, forced to testify in trials or bless marriages they didn't support. Their purity was a tool wielded by others. Revered, yes, but rarely free. You meet a senator's daughter, briefly, who once begged her family to send her into the temple just to escape marriage. They said no. She married a man 3 times her age. Now she plays her role in public, but behind closed doors she says she envies the Vestals. At least they're alone, she whispers. Loneliness is better than being someone's property. There's debate among scholars even now about whether the Vestals had power, or simply the illusion of it. Some argue they were the most autonomous women in Roman society, unmarried, untouchable, involved in state decisions. Others believe they were trapped in a gilded cage, valued only as long as they remained flawless. The answer, as always, is probably both. Your time at the temple ends with a ritual cleansing. You're not a Vestal, you never will be, but you're given the honour of participating in a minor rite, pouring water over your hands, reciting a simple line in Latin about devotion and patience. You feel the sting of cool water, the echo of your own voice in the high stone chamber. It's not emotional, it's not profound, but it's yours. You return to the senator's house changed, not transformed, but adjusted. You no longer respond so quickly. You sit with discomfort instead of rushing to escape it. When men speak to you, you don't lean in. You hold your ground, you wait, you watch. And when a certain young official tries to press too close, too fast, you simply look at him, blankly, calmly, as Servia taught you, and he flinches. The power isn't in the flirtation anymore. It's in the pause, the possibility that you have nothing to prove. That night you light your own lamp. No prayers, no audience. Just you, your thoughts, and a small flame that stays lit because you choose to tend it. The road to the east is longer than you expected, and stranger than you imagined. Rome's sharp edges fade behind you, replaced by winding rivers, high mountain passes, and the slow blooming of a different kind of power. When you arrive in China, it is not to fanfare, but to silence. A quiet so rich it feels deliberate, like a curtain dropping between one life and the next. Here, in the Tang Dynasty court, girls are not shaped by grand speeches or public ceremony. They are moulded by music, scent, stillness, and tea. Your room in the palace is small but elegant. Woven mats, bronze mirrors, shelves lined with scrolls and little pots of unpronounceable creams. A servant girl shows you how to press your robes into perfect creases, how to arrange your hair in loops and pins that say everything about your status without saying a word. But it's not just grooming here, it's choreography. Every movement, pouring tea, adjusting a sleeve, opening a fan, is practiced until it feels like a dance passed down from the gods. You're brought to your first lesson in a pavilion that smells like sandalwood and plum blossoms. There's music playing, soft, meandering notes from a 𝒾𝓃𝓏, plucked by a woman with long fingers and an unreadable expression. She nods as you enter, then resumes her song. No words, just music, and that lingering scent in the air wrapping around you like a net. A voice behind you says, "Stillness is the first seduction." You turn to see an older woman, not a servant, but not a noble either. She's dressed in silk so light it floats when she walks, and she never lifts her voice above a whisper. Here, you will learn not how to speak, she tells you, but how to be heard without a sound. The lessons begin slowly. Tea is your first subject, not the kind you gulp down on cold days, but ceremonial tea, ritual tea. You learn to warm the pot, rinse the cups, steep the leaves precisely. The act of serving becomes a performance, a conversation without words. In this court, tea is not just refreshment, it's symbolism. You serve bitterness with grace, you offer sweetness last. Quirky fact. Some court women were trained to serve tea using specific finger positions that mimicked classical calligraphy strokes. Each gesture was said to evoke a poetic mood. Grace, melancholy, invitation, farewell. You try to remember them all, but they slip through your fingers like steam. There's no open talk of intimacy here. Not like in Rome or Egypt. You don't ask questions directly. You listen, instead, to metaphors. The moon reflects best on still water, one tutor tells you. Your heart must be like that water. Another compares seduction to ink on silk. If you press too hard, you ruin both. But you do learn. Oh, you learn. How to make eye contact that lingers just one heartbeat too long. How to bow so that the nape of your neck is exposed. Subtle, intentional, never clumsy. How to hold a fan not to cool yourself, but to reveal or conceal your expression. Every gesture becomes loaded, every glance a message with 5 possible meanings. You become fluent in silence. Historical fact. During the Tang dynasty, court women, especially concubines, were often selected for their artistic talents as much as for beauty. Many were expected to sing, dance, write poetry, and play instruments at a professional level. The emperor's court was not just a political space. It was an artistic one, where sensuality and performance blurred into diplomacy. You begin lessons in poetry. Not writing, not yet, just recitation. You read the poems of 𝒮𝑉 aloud in the garden, learning how to let your voice fall like mist or rise like wind. You're told to match your tone to the poem's meaning, and then, when you're better, to sing the opposite. Say sorrow with a smile, longing with serenity. Your words become mirrors that reflect, distort, or hide. And then, of course, there's scent. Perfume here is an art form. You're introduced to a room filled with burners, oils, and pressed powders. The mistress of fragrance shows you how to blend resins and dried petals, how to scent a scroll or a sleeve so subtly that someone only notices when they've already leaned too close. She smiles when you ask if this is meant for seduction. Seduction, she replies, is a side effect. Awareness is the goal. There's debate among historians about whether Tang concubines were truly influential or simply decorative. Some point to powerful women like young 𝒮𝓏, one of the emperor's favourites, who was blamed for political instability and ultimately executed. Others argue that women like her had no real power, only the illusion of it, until that illusion cracked. You walk a fine line between those versions every day. The woman who teaches you music also teaches you breath. Not in the practical way, but in the emotional sense. She sits beside you, playing slow notes, and instructs you to breathe in time with the melody. When you master your breath, she says, you master your presence. You ask if the emperor will ever hear you play. She answers only, someone will. One afternoon a scholar passes by your lesson, pausing to listen as you read a Tang poem about forbidden love. He doesn't say a word, but he lingers. You don't smile, you don't even look up, but you know. The tutor nods slightly. You pass the test. Still, there's danger in being too noticed. One of the girls, older, clever, proud, writes a poem that spreads too fast. It's traced back to her, a metaphor too sharp about longing, too pointed in its timing. She disappears overnight. Her room is empty by dawn. No one speaks of her again, but her scent still lingers in the doorway, warm and floral. You finish your tea lessons with a quiet ceremony. No applause, no announcement. Just you, a small clay pot, and a man who watches you serve with calm intensity. He says nothing, only nods when the final cup is poured. You don't even learn his name. But after that day, the servants start referring to you differently. Not as girl, but as pupil. It's a small shift. Monumental. You fall asleep that night with jasmine in your hair, your fingertips stained faintly with ink and tea. You dream of scrolls unrolling, fans unfolding, and words floating just out of reach. And somewhere in the dream, a voice says, "The most powerful woman is the one who moves without being seen." You wake before dawn and begin again. It starts with a fan. Not a practical one for cooling your face in the heavy heat, but a painted one, silk stretched across slender bamboo ribs, handed to you with both care and ceremony. Hold it as if it knows your secrets, your tutor tells you. She doesn't smile when she says it, and you believe she means it literally. In the Tang court, every object becomes a vessel for suggestion. The fan becomes your mouth. The fan becomes your shield. And as you'll soon discover, the fan becomes your weapon. Your training now shifts from the foundational into the fluid. Less about what you learn and more about how you apply it. You're no longer the newest girl in the garden. Another has arrived, shy and slow, eyes darting to your hands when you pour tea. You've become the reference point. Not quite the master, but the one others now try to imitate. It's flattering. It's also pressure. You can feel the court watching more closely now, not with cruelty, but with calculation. Today's lesson is called gesture, but it quickly reveals itself to be something far more layered. You're taught how to angle your chin during a bow to show deference, or dominance depending on degree. How to hold your fan slightly askew when someone displeases you. How to flick your sleeve when entering a room to signal confidence without seeming proud. The detail is maddening. You redo one movement 12 times before it passes. Your instructor simply says, "When you make it look natural, you're ready." And then there's walking. You thought you knew how to walk. You did not. You're shown how to drift, not march. How to time your steps so that your arrival in a doorway aligns with a lull in conversation. The trick isn't just entering. It's being noticed without seeming to try. You practice until your feet ache, gliding silently across polished stone, your fan half open, eyes lowered. Too fast, your tutor says. You look eager. Then later, too slow, you look dull. You finally find the pace, somewhere between moonrise and memory. Fringe fact. In the Tang court, women were often forbidden to express desire openly, so they developed a coded language of gestures and accessories. An open fan meant, "I see you." A closed one, "Not tonight." Dropping it, a silent plea for attention. In skilled hands, a fan was an entire conversation. In yours, it's becoming fluent. You're paired one evening with a poetry student. Male, awkward, dressed in robes too new to be believable. He's part of a visiting delegation, here to impress someone, possibly the emperor, but more likely the emperor's court. You're told to serve him tea and offer subtle challenge. That's the phrase your instructor uses. Subtle challenge. You still don't know what it means, but when you sit across from him, something clicks. You ask him a question about his favourite poem. He answers too quickly. Nervous. You smile. Soft, non-committal. He fumbles his cup. You recite the same poem, but change the final line to something darker, sadder. He blinks. You've shifted the tone. You watch him try to catch up. You've won. Not because you said more, but because he didn't expect you to say anything at all. That night your tutor says, "That's what a whisper can do when no one expects it." Historical fact. Women of the Tang dynasty often held informal salons within the palace walls, gatherings where poetry, calligraphy and music blurred with flirtation and intrigue. Though rarely acknowledged in official records, these salons were crucial social spaces where alliances were formed and rivalries quietly sharpened. Sometimes a well-placed couplet could change a girl's entire future. You're beginning to understand that what you're learning isn't about seduction, not directly. It's about presence, the ability to change the mood of a room by simply being in it. You're taught to sit at a distance that suggests availability, but not eagerness. You're trained to glance without gazing, to compliment indirectly, by comparing a man's poem to a season, his voice to rain, his posture to a willow. Never say what you mean. Wrap it in silk first. One day, a scroll arrives. It's unsigned. A short poem written in precise calligraphy, comparing you to the sound of a bell heard once, then never again. It's not brilliant, but it's intimate. You ask no questions, but keep it tucked inside your robe for 3 days before burning it in the incense brazier. Not because you didn't like it, because mystery has more weight than gratitude here. There's a girl in your class, Yoon, who becomes both rival and mirror. She's quieter than you, and possibly more graceful, but lacks your instinct for when to speak. You study each other constantly, sometimes sharing a laugh, other times offering each other veiled critiques disguised as compliments. "Your sleeve work is lovely," she says once, "like a bird learning to land." You respond, "Your tea pouring is perfect, so mechanical." The tension hums beneath your civility, and you both thrive on it. Scholars today still argue whether Tang court girls had real choice in who they served, who they entertained, or who they eventually belonged to. Some texts suggest selections were made by eunuchs or matchmakers. Others claim the most talented women could steer their own fates through skill alone. As you glide through your daily rituals, you begin to believe both are true. You don't choose the game, but you can learn to rig the rules. A rare moment of levity comes during a dance lesson. You're practicing the plum blossom turn, a slow spin designed to echo the falling of petals. You lose your balance and nearly fall. For the first time, your tutor laughs. "Even the blossoms fall," she says, helping you up. But not all of them stay down. The metaphor is obvious. It still works. That evening, you're invited to a salon, not as a servant or student, but as a participant. You bring your guqin, your fan, and your best poem, folded carefully into your sleeve. You don't know who will be there, or what will be asked of you. You only know that you'll need to be perfect, or at least close enough to pass for it. And so you walk slowly through the lantern-lit halls, fan half open, face unreadable. A girl among silk and shadows, carrying 1,000 gestures in your hands and 1,000 secrets on your breath. Not because you've been taught what to do, but because you've learned how to choose when to do it. The room is all reflections, mirrors on every surface, walls, ceiling, even the floor, polished until the flicker of a single flame echoes into infinity. You step inside barefoot, the marble cool beneath your soles, the air heavy with rosewater and saffron. This is the 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓎, the mirror palace, deep within the walls of the Mughal imperial harem, and you're no longer just a student of gestures. You're now a reflection yourself, one shaped, polished, and positioned with care. India is warmer, slower, more fragrant than the courts you've known before, and more layered. Everything here comes in doubles, ritual and reality, purity and pleasure, devotion and desire. You're led through arches carved with verses from the Quran, down corridors that twist like poetry, until you arrive at the inner zanana, the women's quarters. But don't let the word fool you. These women aren't cloistered in silence. They are stars in orbit around an emperor, and if they play their roles right, they burn hotter than any sun. Your new instructor is called Bibi Nazneen. She moves like she was born to music, her arms trailing invisible silks even when she's still. You're not here to entertain, she tells you, her bangles chiming softly. You are here to influence. Then she sits and begins grinding sandalwood paste with deliberate care, as if even this mundane task has deeper meaning. And in this palace, it does. The training begins with scent. You thought you understood perfume in Egypt and China, but here it becomes something else entirely. Alchemy. You're shown how to distill oils from flowers, how to fold cardamom pods into linen sachets, how to smear a drop of jasmine behind your ear so that it warms with your pulse. Each scent means something different. Devotion, invitation, intrigue, farewell. You begin wearing layers of fragrance like armour. You no longer walk into a room. You arrive and the air remembers. Next come the textiles. Silk, of course, but also muslin so fine it's said a bolt can pass through a ring. Your clothes are not chosen by accident. The colour, the weight, the way it clings or flows, all are deliberate choices and each one speaks a different language. Red is for readiness, gold for favour, indigo for waiting. You learn to control your message before you've even said a word. You're introduced to 𝐻𝒾𝓃𝓃, classical dance, but this isn't theatre, it's code. Every motion is a word, every gesture a syllable. You're taught to tell stories with your eyes, to lift your brows just so, to flick your wrist with exactly the right tempo to imply longing, or resistance, or promise. You dance until your feet ache, then you dance more, because this is how Mughal girls are trained to speak, through movement. Historical fact. In the Mughal Empire, especially under emperors like Akbar and Shah Jahan, court women were highly educated and often trained in poetry, music, and diplomacy. Some, like Nur Jahan, rose to positions of genuine power, issuing imperial orders, minting coins in their name, and influencing state affairs. These weren't just companions, they were advisors in silk. One evening, Bibi Nazneen brings you to a candlelit alcove where the walls are covered in tiny glass fragments, the famed mirrors of the 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓎. "Watch," she says. Then she walks across the room, her steps slow and deliberate. Her reflection shatters and multiplies around her, dozens of versions echoing her grace. When the emperor sees you, she tells you, he must not know where to look, confuse his eyes, capture his mind. If he cannot name what he feels, he cannot forget it. You begin to understand the strategy here. You're not trained to be beautiful. You're trained to be unforgettable. There's a difference. You're also introduced to the art of conversation, but not idle chat. Mehfil training, it's called. You sit in circles with other girls, reciting ghazals, poems of love and longing. You learn to respond with a verse that matches in rhythm and theme. Sometimes your lines are subtle, sometimes they sting. One girl recites a couplet comparing herself to a flame. You answer, "And I, the moth who knew it would burn and flew anyway." The room hums with appreciation. You're getting better. Fringe fact. The Mughals believed in the divine power of sound and word. Courtly love poems were often sung as qawwali, spiritual hymns that blurred the line between erotic and sacred. Many concubines were trained to recite or sing these poems, not just to entertain, but to elevate the mood into something transcendent. Intimacy was divine when paired with poetry. You're told little about the emperor himself. He's a distant figure veiled behind ceremony and protocol, but sometimes girls are called forward. Not always for the reasons you think. One is selected to prepare his hookah, another to select a verse for his evening reflection. Each act is small, symbolic, but symbolic things move mountains here. There's a girl named Zuleika who once corrected the emperor's grammar in a poem. She wasn't punished. She was summoned the next night and never returned to the shared dormitory. No one knows what happened, but the musicians played her favourite song for 3 days afterward. Make of that what you will. Scholars today debate whether the Mughal Zanana was a prison or a palace. Some argue the women were secluded, controlled, manipulated. Others point to the wealth, education, and political influence many wielded behind the scenes. You, living in it, know the truth is slippery. It is both, and neither. Power is relative. So is freedom. One night during your 𝐻𝒾𝓃𝓃 practice, the music stops. Bibi Nazneen watches you closely and says, "Now do it again. But this time, dance as if you know he's watching." You don't ask who. You don't need to. You begin again, and this time your heartbeat matches the rhythm. This time your eyes say more than your feet ever could. Later, when the candles are low and the room quiet, you walk through the Sheesh Mahal alone. Your reflection meets you at every turn, countless versions of you spun out like constellations. You stop and stare, fan lowered, scent fading slowly from your skin. And for the first time, you don't just see a girl trained to please. You see someone capable of choosing when to be flame and when to be mirror. You're not supposed to touch the scroll. That's the first thing they tell you. It rests in the centre of the low lacquered table, bound in silk, its ends capped with jade, the title brushed in ancient script so fluid it might be mistaken for wind. This is no ordinary book. This is the Kama Sutra, but not the version sold in tourist markets, not the crude shorthand turned into punchlines. This is the Imperial Edition, hand-inked and meant only for certain eyes. You do not reach for it, you wait. The tutor, a man old enough that his beard brushes the table when he bows, finally unrolls it himself, handling it with reverence. This is not about indulgence, he says. This is about harmony, discipline, timing, precision. You glance sideways at the other girls, all equally still, equally wide-eyed. You're in a side chamber of the Mughal court now, far from the perfume lessons and the dance sessions. This room is cooler, quieter, and sharper. It hums with a kind of unspoken warning. What you learn here is not for everyone. The Kama Sutra, you're told, is not a sex manual. Not truly. It's a philosophy of life, a handbook on pleasure, yes, but also on partnership, conduct, flirtation, seduction, communication. The section on intimacy is only one part. You begin not with positions but with poetry, verses about longing, courtship, the agony of waiting. You study how desire is delayed, not fulfilled. Pleasure without patience is noise, the tutor says, pausing to sip water. Real intimacy begins before the touch. You're not instructed in specifics, not yet. Instead, you're guided through metaphor. You learn how body and breath interact, how anticipation is more powerful than satisfaction. One lesson is entirely about sighs. Yes, sighs. You're asked to practice them. Soft, longing, hesitant, mischievous. You feel absurd. Then you hear another girl's attempt and the room falls quiet. She sighs again. This time, even the tutor looks up. Quirky fact. The Kama Sutra was written not just for lovers but for courtesans too. It outlines how a trained woman could elevate not only a man's pleasure, but his mind. It includes advice on how to argue, how to charm his friends, how to become indispensable without seeming clingy. You realise that once again, this isn't about being desired, it's about being remembered. You're given a second text, the 𝒮𝓃𝓚, the Secrets of Love. This one goes deeper into the psychological, how to recognise different types of lovers, how to match your energy to theirs, how to read their moods by the position of their hands or the way they blink during a story. You thought you were learning seduction. What you're actually learning is anthropology. But there is physical instruction, eventually. Carefully supervised, respectfully distant. You're taught how to breathe from your belly, how to stretch your back so your spine stays fluid, how to move with both intent and softness. Every gesture is mirrored in nature. Movements compared to vines, rivers, flames. You practice on cushions, not people. You learn to arch like a swan, to recline like a mango branch. You don't giggle. No one does. There's too much respect in the room for that. There's debate among scholars about how much these texts were actually used in training women at court. Some argue they were reserved for high courtesans, not royal girls. Others say elite daughters, especially those destined for foreign princes or emperors, were absolutely prepared with this knowledge. You're living proof of the latter. You wouldn't be here if you weren't expected to become more than just decoration. One evening your tutor dims the lanterns and sets out a series of scented oils. Tonight we study response, he says. He does not touch you. That is never part of the lesson. Instead, he applies drops of oil to cloth and asks you to inhale. Each scent is meant to provoke a reaction. Calm, excitement, warmth, focus. You're taught to pair scent with memory, touch with emotion. You're learning how to choreograph not just your movements but your effect. And then there are the mirrors again. Always the mirrors. You're instructed to practice alone, watching how your body moves, how your face reacts when you imagine being seen. You're told to learn the exact angle at which you look most open, or most mysterious. To be seen is not the same as being exposed, your instructor says. Choose what to reveal. The rest is power. You're also introduced to the art of delay, how to close your eyes at the right moment, how to linger near someone without initiating touch, how to speak in a lower register when you say goodbye. One entire lesson is about the word no, how to say it without ending desire. The most skilled courtesans, the tutor says, never say yes directly. They let others arrive at it themselves. There's a girl in your group, Rati, who struggles. She's beautiful, no doubt, but too open, too fast to please. She gets notes every day, too eager, too obvious, too easy to read. One night, you find her crying in the corridor. You sit beside her and say nothing for a while. Then you offer her the line you learned in Rome. Make them wonder if they've won you. That's the real victory. She smiles through her tears. I wish I were more like you. You shake your head. No, just make them think you are. Historical aside, while many dismiss the Kama Sutra today as erotic curiosity, it was originally part of a much larger conversation in Indian society about Artha, or the art of living. It belonged to a system of thought where pleasure was seen as essential, not sinful. and where women were considered full participants in that pleasure, not passive recipients, at least in theory. You end your final lesson with a test, not written, not spoken. You're asked to perform a sequence of gestures and expressions, a silent story of invitation and refusal, longing and resolve. The tutor watches, then nods once. You have passed. That night you're sent a gift, a folded sari the colour of pomegranate skin and a single pearl, nestled in a dish of rose petals. No note, no name. But the scent, sandalwood and saffron, tells you everything. Someone noticed and remembered. You sleep in a haze of incense, your hands still warm from the dance, your thoughts tangled in silk and script. You do not dream of romance. You dream of power wrapped in poetry. The first time you set foot inside the Persian court, it's like stepping into a whisper. Not silence. No, the air here is full of sound, but the kind of hush that lingers after someone important has just left the room. The scent is heavier than you're used to. Rosewater, oud, and a thin thread of smoke from a burning sprig of frankincense. You follow a woman whose footsteps are so silent, you check more than once to make sure she's real. Her robes don't rustle, her bracelets don't chime. You're not sure if she's trained herself to move like that, or if she was born into silence. Either way, you're meant to learn the same. Your lessons here begin not in a hall or courtyard, but in a library. The ceiling is painted like a night sky. Stars arranged not by astronomy, but by poetry. You sit beneath verses etched in gold, listening to the sound of your own breath, as a woman in midnight blue robes opens a scroll and begins to read. She doesn't explain anything. She simply reads. Come, for the palace has grown weary without your footfall. Come, for the jasmine closes its bloom when you do not pass. You close your eyes, and the words become a place. This is Persian courtship. Not a chase, not performance, an invitation. Soft, suggestive, absolute. Here, girls are trained not to seduce with motion, but with stillness. You learn how to listen without interrupting, how to tilt your head just enough to signal interest without surrender. You're taught that Persian elegance lies in suggestion, not declaration. A love poem half recited, a sleeve tugged just short of falling, a smile that curves, then vanishes. Everything here is slower, sharper, like a poem read one word at a time. You begin studying tarof, the Persian art of politeness, which, on the surface, is all about refusal. You offer tea. He refuses. You insist. He refuses again. Only on the third offer does he accept. Everything is ritual. But beneath that ritual lies deep meaning. You're trained to read it all. When to persist. When to relent. When no is actually yes, and when yes is a trap. It's a verbal chess game, and every move teaches you how to own a room without touching anyone in it. Fringe fact, in elite Persian courts, girls were often educated alongside poetry and music in something called adab, a combination of etiquette, literature, and moral philosophy. It was as much about posture and tone as it was about understanding Persian cultural values. To fail at adab was to be unworthy of the court. To master it was to become unforgettable. You also learn the language of gesture. It's not as theatrical as in China, nor as sensual as in India. Here, everything is refined. You're taught to walk so your hem never brushes the floor, to pour tea without looking at the cup, to veil and unveil your face in exact degrees depending on who enters the room. The goal isn't to reveal yourself, it's to reveal control. One lesson is entirely about gazes. There are 5, your instructor says. The gaze of greeting, the gaze of gratitude, the gaze of promise, the gaze of refusal, and the gaze of longing. You practice each in front of a mirror. They're almost identical. Almost. You begin to understand that in this court, power lives in fractions. Historical fact. In the Safavid and Qajar dynasties, royal harems were complex institutions, home to wives, concubines, daughters, and female scholars. Women of the harem were often highly educated, politically savvy, and in some cases influential in succession disputes. They used poetry, gifting, and strategic silence as tools of statecraft. You're introduced to music next. Soft, winding melodies played on the sitar, the santa, the ney. Each song is about something unspeakable, a goodbye, a memory, a desire too dangerous to name. You're told not to smile while listening. Smiling implies you've misunderstood. This music is for remembering what you've lost, or what you might never gain. You sit for hours, eyes closed, learning to feel without moving. One night, your instructor invites you to help her prepare an attar, a concentrated perfume made from thousands of rose petals crushed and distilled over hours. You take turns grinding the petals, then straining them into copper flasks. She tells you, a girl's scent should linger in a man's memory longer than her name. She then places a single drop of the attar on your pulse point. The scent haunts you for days. You also study correspondence. You're taught to write letters in Persian calligraphy, not as documents, but as seduction. Every loop and curve is art. You learn how to choose words that are technically innocent but laced with meaning. There's a phrase you're taught to open with, "I dreamt of your silence." It means nothing. It means everything. One of the girls in your circle receives a letter sealed in green wax, an unofficial colour. She reads it silently, then burns it. You don't ask what it said. You don't need to. The next morning her clothes are all white. No colour, no perfume. She's in mourning for something she won't name. Scholars often debate whether Persian women had real agency in the royal courts. Some argue that veiling and seclusion were tools of control. Others suggest that these women wielded incredible influence through intimate channels, controlling access, guiding succession, shaping art and culture. What you know is this. These women were rarely seen, but always felt. Your last lesson is in posture. You sit for hours, back straight, head bowed slightly. Not in submission, but in self-possession. You're told that true elegance is the absence of need. Want nothing, your instructor says, and everything will come to you. That evening, during a private poetry gathering, you're asked to read a ghazal. You choose one about distance. Your voice is calm, your hand still. When you finish, the room is quiet for 3 long breaths. Then someone claps, once, then again. The sound is soft, sparse, but it's enough. Later you walk through the palace gardens, the scent of night-blooming roses curling around your ankles. You do not smile, you do not speak, but you know this. Every step you take now leaves a mark, even if no one sees it. Because here, in the hush of the Persian court, power is not loud. It is written in scent, in silence, in the space between verses. You're 13 years old the first time they let you inside the Harem-i Humayun, the imperial harem of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. You don't belong here yet. Not really. But the older girls say this is when it starts. You've been scrubbed until your skin smells like rose and lemon, dressed in a pale silk shift that clings awkwardly to your growing body, and instructed not to speak unless spoken to. And then the doors open. Inside is a world made of echoes, polished tiles that reflect your footsteps, low voices bouncing off domed ceilings, laughter that comes in waves and disappears just as fast. The corridors twist like vines, leading to rooms that belong to no one and everyone. This is not a prison. This is a stage, and you're about to learn your lines. In the Ottoman Empire, the harem is a universe of women, concubines, tutors, mothers, servants and guards, all overseen by one ultimate figure, the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, and arguably the most powerful woman in the empire. She rules this world, and if you're lucky, or strategic, you might rise through the ranks until she knows your name. Your training begins in the Asemi Odasa, the novice quarters, where girls like you are brought in from across the empire. Greek, Circassian, Albanian, Georgian, some enslaved, some gifted, a few born into palace service. You are all young, wide-eyed and confused. But not for long. A woman named Hürrem takes charge of you. Not that Hürrem, the legendary concubine turned queen of Suleiman the Magnificent, but another who took her name as a symbol of ambition. She's sleek as a blade in silk, and her words cut just as precisely. In this place, she says, the floor listens, so be careful where you step. You learn to move soundlessly. Your feet must never slap the tile. You learn to bathe the way a queen would, not just to clean, but to perform it. Washing becomes choreography. Every drop of water, every sigh, every flick of the wrist carries meaning. You're told to never seem unaware of your body. Even in privacy, someone is always watching. Your language lessons begin next. Ottoman Turkish, Arabic, Persian. Your tongue trips over all 3, but you're expected to master at least 2. Why? Because power in the harem doesn't just come from beauty, it comes from being useful. A girl who can recite poetry, whisper political advice, or read secret letters has more value than 10 perfect faces. Historical fact: the Ottoman harem wasn't simply a place for the Sultan's pleasures. It was a political institution, a factory for alliances and influence. Many of its women, especially those who became mothers to princes, held immense power behind the scenes, sometimes issuing orders under the Sultan's seal. You're taught to dance, but never with abandon. The style here is subtle, wrists curling like smoke, hips shifting just enough to imply rhythm without becoming crude. You learn the tambourine, the zither, the ney flute, not to play in public, but to understand music, to speak it, to move with it. Then there is embroidery. More than a pastime, it's a language. The motifs you stitch carry hidden messages: a tulip for passion, a pomegranate for fertility, a weeping willow for longing. Your needle becomes a pen, your fabric a letter. And sometimes these embroidered messages are sent, folded into handkerchiefs, tucked into robes, left where the right person might find them. Quirky fact: harem girls often perfume not just their bodies but their letters. A scented corner of silk might be passed secretly to a visiting noble or court musician. In some cases, these invisible messages were enough to change a girl's fate. An invitation, a challenge, a silent confession. You begin to understand the hierarchy. The lowest rank are the 𝒾𝓃𝓔, the concubines in training like you. Above them are the 𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓎, the senior attendants. Then the 𝒮𝓾𝓈𝓉𝑝, who oversee sections of the harem. Above them all, the Valide Sultan and the 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓐 Sultan, the Sultan's favourite. No one gets there by accident. Every step up is a choice, a calculation, a risk, and every misstep is punished. You see it happen. A girl who speaks out of turn is reassigned to laundry. Another who dares flirt with a guard vanishes overnight. The next morning the bathhouse is quieter. Your tutor says only, "She was not careful." You understand the message. You also begin learning 𝒾𝓕, the art of private audience. Not physical intimacy, yet, but presence. How to carry yourself in an enclosed space with a man who can have anything and make him want you. You practice silence. You practice eye contact. You learn to anticipate a question before it's asked, to respond with the answer he didn't know he wanted. There's debate among modern scholars about whether the girls in the harem were victims or power players. Some see the entire institution as cruel captivity. Others argue it was the only place in the empire where women could rise to serious influence, especially if they bore sons. You live in that paradox daily. One afternoon, during a poetry lesson, a visitor passes through. Not the Sultan, just one of his advisors. You're not meant to notice him, but he notices you. You drop your gaze exactly 1 second too late, just long enough to be remembered. That night a flower appears on your pillow, white jasmine. No note, no name. Your mentor finds it and says nothing, just takes the flower, places it in a bowl of water, and sets it outside your door. "Next time," she says, "be careful what you let bloom." You lie awake thinking about it. What a glance costs, what it might earn, how something as small as a tilt of your head can change the direction of your future. You understand now. The Ottoman harem doesn't teach you how to seduce. It teaches you how to survive seduction. It's the heat that gets you first, not the sun outside, but the steam. Inside the hammam, the Ottoman bathhouse nestled deep within the harem's twisting corridors, everything blurs. Your body, your thoughts, even time itself. You enter wrapped in fine linen, barefoot, skin still tingling from the jasmine oil they rubbed into your arms earlier. The marble is slick and warm underfoot, and the air smells of soap, citrus, and something metallic, water meeting stone again and again through centuries. You're not here to bathe. Not really. You're here to listen. This is where alliances are whispered into life. Girls soak and scrub and smooth each other's skin, but beneath the splashing and laughter, there is something sharper happening. Information flows faster here than anywhere else in the palace. Who is rising in favour? Who received an anonymous gift? Who was summoned to the private garden and who was not? In the hammam, gossip is a form of currency, and the wisest girls spend it carefully. Your mentor, now promoted to 𝒮𝓾𝓚 for her discretion and strategy, brings you in under her wing, literally. She sits you beside her in the warmest part of the room, closest to the domed ceiling where light filters through pierced marble, in patterns that fall across your skin like lace. She gestures for silence, then nods toward a group of girls across the pool. That one with the red sash? Her aunt is a palace cook. She knows who the Sultan favours this week. Then gesturing again. And that girl brushing her hair? Her sister was dismissed last year. She's still bitter. She listens, but she's reckless. Don't get too close. This too is training. No books, no tutors. Just observation. You start to learn how to read between the lines of casual chatter. A girl says she loves poetry. She's hinting she's received a verse. One says she's tired of quince jam. She means someone brought her too many gifts. Language here is layered. Everything means something else. Fringe fact. The women of the Ottoman harem used fan signals, flower arrangements, and even embroidery patterns to communicate in secret. But the hammam was where spoken codes thrived. A whisper in the steam could be as sharp as a dagger, or as sweet as a promise. You're told to watch how girls handle favours. A real player never accepts a gift immediately. She delays, sends back a scented ribbon, a folded napkin, a question. When you say yes too quickly, your mentor says, you've already lost. And then there's calligraphy. You begin formal lessons in the afternoons, seated in small study rooms where sunlight illuminates delicate Arabic script etched onto practice tablets. You learn to hold the reed pen at the perfect angle, to breathe with the curve of each letter. You copy the names of flowers, of stars, of virtues. The ink stains your fingers for days. You don't mind. One day, your teacher brings a letter, not for you, but as an example. This, she says, is how a girl once secured a lifetime of favour with only 22 words. She reads it aloud. It's not explicit, not even romantic, just an elegant phrase comparing the Sultan's voice to the call to prayer heard at dawn. You understand instantly. Beauty and restraint is more powerful than any blunt desire. Historical fact, Ottoman calligraphy wasn't just an art, it was a status symbol. Women in the imperial harem who mastered the delicate script were often tasked with copying religious texts, poetry, or diplomatic messages. A girl with elegant handwriting was often considered more refined and more desirable. You begin noticing how much the walls are listening, not literally of course, but figuratively. The way servants pass slowly near conversations, how guards linger a bit too long, how eunuchs lower their eyes but never leave the room. Everyone is watching someone. Everyone reports to someone, and yet no one ever admits this outright. The harem's surveillance is elegant and omnipresent. That's when you start practicing your own version of silence, not quietness, but invisibility. You smile at the right people. You linger near doors, pick up stray details, store them like pins. You begin making friends not for comfort, but for coverage. One girl helps you secure more sewing cloth. Another smuggles you candied nuts. In return, you offer nothing except being a trusted ear. That alone makes you valuable. You're taught how to serve coffee. Yes, coffee. It's an entire ritual here, laced with flirtation, symbolism, and political nuance. You must prepare it correctly, pour it smoothly, and add sugar only when instructed. One wrong move, and you risk offending someone powerful. One right move, and you might earn a quiet smile that changes your week, or your future. One girl you know, 𝒮𝓃𝓚, served coffee to the Sultan's advisor with such skill that she was given a brocade scarf and a private poem the next day. She says she only stirred clockwise. You think there's more to it than that. Quirky fact. In some Ottoman households, especially among the elite, a prospective bride's coffee-making skill was considered a deciding factor in marriage arrangements. The ritual was so serious that some girls trained for years. You're not marrying, not yet. But in a place like this, coffee is courtship, politics, and survival in one cup. The days blur. Steam, ink, whispers, scent. You dance only occasionally now. Formal lessons have slowed. You're being groomed for something different. Not a performance, a role. You're told that soon you'll be tested, not through exams, but through invitation. Someone, somewhere, will request your presence. And if you're ready, you'll know what to do. And then it happens. A folded note arrives in your laundry basket. No signature, just a poem in flawless calligraphy. I dreamt of silence and awoke wanting music. You know the hand. You know what it means. You place the note under your pillow and say nothing. Your mentor finds it, of course. She always does. She reads it, folds it back, and slides it into your sleeve. Don't answer yet, she says. The real power lies in the pause. That night in the hammam you lean back in the water, steam curling around your arms like silk. A girl nearby hums softly. Someone is whispering near the edge of the pool, but for once, you don't listen. You already know what's coming, and you are ready. It's still dark outside when you arrive in Kyoto. The lanterns along the street are just beginning to fade, their soft glow retreating from the creeping edges of morning. You've come alone, though not by choice, more like tradition. Every girl begins this path alone. You're shown into a house with a wooden facade and paper windows, and the moment the door closes behind you, the silence feels alive. You've entered the world of the Maiko, apprentice geisha, a world built on artifice, precision, and the careful, aching study of anticipation. Your name is taken. You're given a new one, soft and elegant, chosen by the woman who will become your okasan, your geisha mother. You're no longer a child, she says. You're a vessel. You don't understand yet what that means, but you will. The house, Okia, is not large, but every inch is curated. The wooden floors shine with care. The tatami mats smell faintly of rice straw. Even the sliding doors whisper when moved. You sleep in a shared room with other girls, but that's the only indulgence. Everything else is discipline. Training begins immediately. First, walking. Yes, walking. Not how you walked yesterday, casually and unaware. This is walking with your knees together, with your back straight, in a kobo. The high wooden sandals that clack loudly with every step. You're told the sound must be steady, never rushed. You're not going anywhere, your teacher says. You're arriving. Next comes etiquette. You learn how to bow properly, one hand flat on top of the other, elbows tucked in, eyes lowered. There are 5 degrees of bow, each for different ranks of people. You spend hours practicing these bows. When your spine aches, your teacher corrects you again. A geisha bows with grace, even in pain. And then, the fan. Again. But different now. In Kyoto, the folding fan is not just an accessory. It is your second face. You're taught how to open it without snapping, how to hold it between 2 fingers lightly, how to use it to laugh, to hide, to reject. You learn that dropping your fan in front of a man, accidentally or otherwise, invites a silent conversation. You practice dropping it with shame, with delight, with fury. They all look nearly the same. Historical fact. The Maiko tradition dates back centuries, with girls often starting as young as 6 or 7. Though modern standards raised the minimum age, the training remained intense, covering music, dance, tea ceremony, conversation, and fashion. Geisha were not courtesans, but entertainers. Still, the line between performance and allure was often fine, and expertly walked. You begin musical training. The shamisen, with its haunting nasal tones, becomes your daily companion. Your fingers bleed the first week. No one gives you bandages. Pain means you're playing it right, your teacher says. You believe her. You also begin lessons in singing, soft melodic verses about moonlight, lost seasons, longing. You're told to sing with a smile. Never let sorrow crease your face. Only your voice may cry. Makeup is a separate ordeal. It takes hours. First, white rice powder covers your face, neck and back, except for a small patch at the nape to hint at bare skin. Mystery, your dresser whispers. It invites the eye. Then, red and black are applied around your eyes and lips, carefully measured, perfectly balanced. You're transformed from girl to doll, from doll to icon. You look into the mirror and don't recognize yourself. You're told that's a good thing. Fringe fact. The first year of a Maiko's training includes little to no speaking during public performances. She must learn to express herself through gestures, silence, and stillness, building the language of allure without relying on words. You find this both liberating and terrifying. You're not taught to seduce. That's important. Geisha are not prostitutes, despite what travellers and films claim. They are artists, trained in the art of making men feel seen, important, curious. You do not give, your teacher says. You let them wonder what might be given. But the pressure is relentless. You learn the tea ceremony, chado, in slow, agonizing detail. How to fold the cloth just so. How to turn the cup, pour the water, offer the bowl with humility and precision. It's a ritual of stillness, of respect. You find it calming until your hands shake from holding one pose too long. Then comes the first time you attend a gathering. You don't speak. You kneel near the back, eyes lowered, fan in hand. The senior geisha performs, playing shamisen, offering banter, refilling drinks, laughing at the right time. You watch her navigate the room like a tide, rising and falling at will, pulling everyone in. You think, This is what power looks like when it whispers. And yet, there is tension here. One girl, Suzu, is your age but sharper. Too sharp. She laughs too quickly, mimics the elders too perfectly. You see her stumble in her dance, recover with a wink. The men love it. The older geisha do not. Within a week she is sent away. Too soon, your teacher says. Too much. There's debate among scholars about whether Maiko training was empowering or exploitative. Some argue it gave women independence in a rigid society, financial autonomy, cultural influence. Others insist it demanded the erasure of self in service of male desire. Living it, you understand both views. You're becoming someone new, but not always someone you recognize. One evening, your Okasan calls you aside. She places a hairpin in your hand, silver, shaped like a crane. You wore this well today, she says. That's all, but it means everything. Hairpins here are currency. They mark status, attention, approval. You sleep with it beside your pillow, as if it might teach you something in your dreams. You begin to enjoy the small triumphs, the moment your footstep sounds even, the time a guest lingers a little longer after you pour his tea, the subtle nod from a senior geisha when you recite your poem without pause. These are your rewards, not coins, not applause, but acknowledgement. Quiet. Earned. One morning you help the younger girls prepare for their own lessons. You show them how to bow, how to fold, how to wait. You don't speak much, but they watch you, eyes wide, as you cross the room in silence, fan closed, eyes forward. And in that moment you feel it. The shift. You're no longer just a vessel. You're something else now. A mirror, a mask, a melody. A girl sculpted into art so finely that her very presence becomes a story. Your hands are folded in your lap, fan closed, body still, but your mind moves fast. You've learned the art of folding fans. Now comes the harder part, folding yourself. Not physically, though the kimonos you wear cinch your body tight enough to reshape your posture, but emotionally, mentally, socially. As a Maiko in Kyoto's inner geisha district, you are no longer learning how to become, you are learning how to conceal. It begins with laughter, not real laughter. That's too wild, too unpredictable. You're taught to laugh with precision. 3 notes, soft, with your hand placed gently over your mouth. Anything louder is vulgar. Anything longer is indulgent. Smile like you've remembered a secret, your instructor tells you, but never enough to share it. You practice in the mirror until your face stops twitching. Then comes sitting. Yes, sitting. You'd think you'd mastered this by now, but the art here is more about absence than presence. You kneel in Caesar, the formal posture, legs folded beneath you, spine tall, hands on thighs, until your toes go numb. You're not to fidget, not to lean, not to sigh. This is what is expected in front of guests. Composure. Even if your muscles scream, your days fall into a rhythm that's less like routine and more like ritual. Each movement, each breath is weighed. In the morning, you polish the wood floors until they shine like water. Then you practice walking, not across flat ground, but across uneven garden stones, balancing with grace in your heavy okobo sandals. After that, voice lessons. How to speak without rushing. How to say irashaimase, welcome, with warmth, but not eagerness. Everything is layered. Historical fact. Geisha culture developed not just as entertainment, but as a counterpoint to the chaotic world of samurai and politics. In an unstable, male-dominated society, geisha offered carefully curated elegance, conversation, and a kind of ritualized attention that calmed the storm outside. And yet their roles were far from passive. They were paid, influential, and often controlled the rhythm of the night. You're trained to tell stories. Not your own, of course. You're not allowed to have those. But legends, fables, anecdotes from the floating world. You learn how to weave them into banter, how to let a man think he's brilliant while gently guiding the entire conversation. He must never feel corrected, your Okasan says. Only seen. There's a game played with fans and folded paper called Tesenkyo. You're taught to play it not for fun, but for flirtation. The goal is to knock a butterfly-shaped target off a small pedestal by throwing your fan. You miss, of course, often, but with just the right expression of mock disappointment, of graceful imperfection. Never win too easily, your instructor tells you. Make it look like he's lucky to witness you try. You're allowed to begin attending ozoshiki, private dinners in tea houses. You do not speak unless addressed. You do not eat unless invited. You pour drinks and serve sweets, all while watching, listening. The senior geisha float around you like older constellations, laughing, storytelling, glowing. You stay near the wall, eyes down, absorbing everything, and you do absorb. The tension, the expectations, the weight of makeup on your face that makes smiling harder, the hours of hair styling that forbid you from sleeping properly for days, the kimono layers that make running impossible, not that you ever would. Stillness is required, perfection is assumed. One night, a guest, a businessman clearly drunk, tries to touch your sleeve. You bow lower than usual, removing yourself from reach without seeming cold. He laughs and says, "This one will be a challenge." The senior geisha beside you says, "She is not yours to challenge." The man laughs again. The conversation moves on, but your body remembers. Fringe fact: while geisha were not prostitutes, many men blurred the lines in their minds. Some geisha, especially historically, did form dana relationships, exclusive patrons who supported them financially, sometimes romantically. These arrangements were complicated, negotiated, and never assumed. But they became gossip fodder for outsiders who couldn't tell performance from permission. You begin to notice how other maiko fold themselves too. One girl, Hana, laughs too easily. Another, Yuki, never speaks at all. You wonder what pieces of themselves they've hidden away to make room for all this precision. Then you wonder about your own. You've stopped daydreaming during dance practice. You no longer hum when you clean the floor. You can't remember the last time someone called you by your real name. There is comfort in the ritual, though. The predictability, the clear rules. When everything outside the geisha house is a storm, the tea ceremony feels like shelter. There's peace in repetition. You begin to understand why so many choose to stay, to live in the floating world forever. Here at least you know the steps, and yet something in you stirs when you pass the 𝒾𝓃𝓒, the flower and willow world as they call it. When the lanterns are lit and the shamisen plays, you see guests waiting, see the other geisha arrive, and sometimes just for a moment you let your gaze lift from the ground. You wonder who they were before they wore white powder and practiced smiles, who they are underneath it all. One day during a music lesson your teacher stops playing. She looks at you, not at your posture or your grip, but at your eyes. "You're not folding," she says quietly. "You're bracing." You don't know what to say. She leans closer. There is a difference. One protects you, the other traps you. That night you practice smiling in the mirror. Not the taught one, not the three-note laugh. A real one, just to remember. Then you fold your fan, just as you've been taught, and slide it into your obi sash. Not as an accessory, as a reminder of all the things you've had to bend you haven't broken yet. You leave Kyoto with a fan tucked into your sleeve and bruises on your heels from weeks of walking in silence. The sea crossing is long, and you spend much of it looking over the edge of the ship, letting the salt wind scrub your thoughts clean. You're heading west again, across waters, across customs, across the careful structure of geisha life, into another world of painted lips and folded secrets. Now you're in Korea, and the path ahead leads through the gates of the Gyobank, the official training house of the Giseng. At first glance it feels familiar. You see silk, hear the tapping rhythm of practice steps, smell incense and ginseng. But there's something sharper here, more grounded. This is not the dreamy elegance of Kyoto, where everything is suggested and nothing is declared. Here, in the courts of Joseon Korea, the Giseng are not veiled metaphors. They are lightning caught in a jar, prized, studied, dangerous in the wrong hands. You're greeted not by soft-spoken women in layered kimono, but by a stern-faced instructor in deep blue hanbok, her hair coiled into a heavy knot atop her head. She doesn't smile. She measures you with her eyes not for beauty but for grit. "You will learn the 12 skills," she says, "or you will leave with none." The 12 skills. You've heard of them. Singing, dancing, calligraphy, poetry, conversation, etiquette, instruments, embroidery, chess, flower arranging, liquor service, and storytelling. It sounds excessive, until you realize every one of these is a weapon. A well-trained Giseng can outwit a scholar, outplay a general, outlast a rival. You're not here to smile. You're here to survive, and if you're clever, to thrive. Your lessons begin with music, gyagum, hegum, daegum, string and wind instruments that require delicate hands and fierce focus. You learn to press your fingertips down until the strings bite, to hold your breath until the final note rings out like a bird over mountains. You must play not with your hands, your teacher says, but with your spine. Then comes dance, but not the ornamental kind. You study 𝒮𝓁𝓉𝓉, the dance of purification, slow, spiralling, performed with a long white scarf that you learn to wield like smoke or a sword. Every motion tells a story of pain, of longing, of restraint. You dance until your arms tremble, until your scarf frays at the edges, and when you finally get it right, the teacher nods once and moves on. That's all you get. That's all you need. Historical fact. During the Joseon dynasty, 𝒾𝓃 were government-registered women trained from girlhood in the fine arts. Though often misunderstood as mere courtesans, many were skilled musicians, poets and entertainers, some rising to political influence or literary fame. The most famous among them, like Hwang Jinhee, are remembered not for whom they served but for what they said. You're also trained in 𝒮𝓿𝑒𝓅, the traditional three-line poem that must be concise but profound. You write dozens, but your first successful one is about distance, how it's measured not in footsteps but in silence. Your instructor reads it, folds the paper and says, "That one might be worth remembering." Conversation lessons follow. These are harder than they sound. You're taught to keep a man talking long enough to learn what he doesn't want to say, to ask a question that seems flattering but is actually piercing, to smile at a lie so gently that he forgets it's a lie at all. This is less flirtation, more verbal combat dressed in silk. Fringe fact, some 𝒾𝓃 were trained specifically to entertain foreign dignitaries and high-ranking officials. These women were fluent in multiple dialects and deeply educated in politics, often becoming the secret channels through which information flowed. Many were more informed than the ministers themselves. You begin to see the hierarchy. The novice girls like you do the laundry and serve tea. The senior 𝒾𝓃 glide through the halls with quiet power, their faces painted with calm, their eyes always watching. The oldest among them, a woman called Madame 𝐵𝑜𝓇𝒾𝓃, sits in the courtyard every morning sipping ginseng tea and reading Confucian texts. She speaks rarely, but when she does, even the male instructors bow. One night, you're summoned to assist at a private gathering, not as entertainment, but as a shadow. You carry wine, refill cups, kneel at the edge of the room while the older girls dance and recite verse. There's a moment, quiet but electric, when one guest, rich robes, lacquered fingernails, catches your eye. You look away, just late enough to make it feel intentional. The next day you find a poem written on rice paper left at your door. Not signed, but it ends with a line you know. The scarf dances, but the hand is still. You don't respond. You're taught how to pour soju correctly, how to refuse a gift without causing insult, how to tie the ribbon of your hanbok to signal interest or disinterest. Your hair is dressed not for beauty, but for status. The pin in your bun changes as you rise in rank. One day, Madame 𝐵𝑜𝓇𝒾𝓃 passes by, pauses and says, "Silver would suit you soon." You say nothing, but your heart tugs once, hard. You also learn limits. Some girls choose 𝒮𝓿𝑒𝓅, exclusive companionship arrangements. Others do not. No one is forced, not exactly. But you learn quickly that refusal must be strategic, not stubborn. You may say no, a teacher tells you, but say it like a gift, not a weapon. There's a girl, 𝒮𝓁𝑒𝓅, who's always too blunt. Brilliant at chess, unmatched in poetry, but cold, sharp-edged. A month passes. Then one morning she's gone. Her room cleared, her name removed. No one speaks of it, but later you find one of her 𝒮𝓿 poems stuffed under your mattress. You keep it. Scholars often debate whether 𝒾𝓃 were empowered or imprisoned. Were they women of art and independence, or tools of the state, decorated and disposable? The truth lies somewhere in the worn soles of your slippers, in the ink smudges on your sleeves, in the bruises on your knees from too many bows. You're not a prisoner, but you are not free. Still, when you perform your first official recital, music, dance, poetry, all seamless, you feel something shift. Not pride, not exactly. Something quieter. A sense of becoming. Not becoming someone else. Becoming more of yourself, layered in silk and secrecy. That night, you take off your hanbok alone. You fold each layer slowly, mindfully. You light a single candle and reread the 𝒮𝓿𝑒𝓅 you wrote that morning. Then you trace the line of your collarbone in the mirror, not with vanity, but with memory. This is what they don't teach you in scrolls, that elegance is a blade, that wit can be armour, that silence, when chosen, is its own kind of speech, and that the girls who survive the 𝒾𝓈 are not just skilled, they are dangerous. The air smells like cinnamon and dust, heavy with a weight you can't name. You've crossed into North Africa now, more desert, more sun, but also more shadow. You find yourself at the gates of a riad in Fez, Morocco, where the walls are tiled in endless patterns of blue and green, and the doors close softly but definitively behind you. Inside is cool stone, filtered light, and the sound of women's voices murmuring behind layers of fabric. You are here to learn a different kind of refinement. Less performance, more presence. The riad belongs to a woman known only as 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓎, the teacher. She greets you in layered white linen, gold filigree at her ears, and an expression as unreadable as a Quranic verse. Her eyes take you in from veil to ankles, and she nods once, slowly. "You will not speak until you are ready to be heard," she says, turning before you can respond. Lesson 1. You're shown to a courtyard lined with orange trees, their blossoms scenting the air so thickly it's almost edible. The floor is mosaic, geometry is too perfect to be accidental. The architecture of the entire place is like that, intricate, symbolic, devotional. You learn quickly that in this culture, beauty is not about being seen. It is about being respected. Your training begins in silence, not out of cruelty, but reverence. The other girls here are older, quieter, eyes lined in kohl but guarded. They come from all over, Berber villages, Ottoman port cities, even across the sea from Al-Andalus. They are al-Hurra, free women, or as free as any woman can be in a world run by men. Some are daughters of scholars, others were taken in as orphans. All are here to master adab, a code of conduct, grace and resistance wrapped in silk. You are taught to sit with elegance, not with spine-breaking stillness like in Kyoto, but with poise. One hip elevated slightly, ankles crossed, shoulders relaxed. Everything about your body must speak confidence without arrogance, readiness without eagerness. You're not a servant, says 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓎. You're the invitation they dare not refuse. Your first lesson is the art of tea, not pouring it, that's child's play. You learn to brew it with mint fresh picked from the garden, with sugar measured by memory, and to pour it from height without spilling a drop. The arc of the stream is judged like a dancer's leap. The sound it makes, the bubbles it forms in the glass, all of it has meaning. Too much noise, your instructor says one day, and it means you are angry. Too few bubbles, and it means you're not invested. Even tea tells the truth. Historical fact. In many North African and Middle Eastern royal courts, women were central to hospitality rituals. They used the preparation and serving of tea as a tool of diplomacy and seduction, offering refreshment, but also gathering information. Some harem women were said to know a guest's intentions before he spoke, based only on how he held the glass. After tea comes poetry, Arabic this time. Classical verse layered with metaphors so rich you sometimes get lost halfway through. You copy lines onto parchment by oil lamp, your calligraphy shaky at first, then steadying. The poems are about longing, exile, impossible beauty, forbidden touch. You ask if these are love poems. 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓎 raises an eyebrow. They are about hunger, she says, not always for flesh. You begin to see how words are used here, not to declare, but to veil. Everything is wrapped in allegory. A rose is never just a rose. It is always an ache, a secret, a symbol. When you recite aloud, you're told to slow down, to let each syllable roll off your tongue like it might sting someone. The pauses matter more than the words. Then comes scent. You thought you knew perfume. You did not. Here, scent is story, memory, and spell. You're taught to make your own attar, grinding amber, blending orange blossom, infusing with clove, myrrh, cedar. The result is deep, not floral, less about sweetness, more about power. Too much rose, your teacher tells you, dabbing your wrist with a cloth. You're not a girl anymore. Fringe fact. In royal harems across the Islamic world, especially in North Africa and Persia, women often created signature perfumes known only to them. These scents were passed down or kept secret, never sold, never shared. It was said a man could fall in love without ever seeing her face, just by passing her in a corridor once. And then, the veil. Not forced, but formal. You're trained in how to wear it, how to let it fall across your face, when to lift it, how to tilt your head so your eyes become the focus. You learn that the veil isn't always about hiding, it's about choosing, when to be seen, how much, and by whom. You're told stories of al-Hurrah who became poets, wives of diplomats, advisors to sultans. One woman, Lala Aisha, was said to be so gifted with words she negotiated trade between cities from behind a silk curtain. Her veil didn't diminish her power, it defined it. Still, your training isn't only courtly. You're taught to defend yourself, not with blades, but with sharpness of tongue, with posture, with silence. You never argue, says al-Mu'allama. You retreat like the tide and drown them later. You practice restraint until it becomes second nature. There's a girl in the Riyadh, Yamina, who doesn't speak for the first 3 weeks. When she finally does, it's during a poetry reading. She recites a verse about a bird flying into a window over and over. No one says anything. But later, you find a strip of her poem tucked inside your slippers. She had noticed you watching. This is how friendships form here. Wordless. Gifted. Scholars argue about the true role of harem women in North African courts. Some call them prisoners, others power brokers. But you now understand that power doesn't have to be loud. It can live in the scent of mint on your skin, in the ink on your fingertips, in the pause before you answer a question. Here, you are not decoration, you are discipline. One evening, al-Mu'allama takes you aside. She hands you a piece of embroidered linen, pale gold thread on soft ivory. In the corner is a single phrase in Arabic. To be still is not to be silent. She doesn't explain, she doesn't need to. That night, as you lie beneath a sky carved into stars by the latticework above your bed, you realise something has shifted. You no longer need to be seen to feel powerful. You no longer perform, you occupy, and that changes everything. The sails crack overhead like warning shots, and the ship sways with a rhythm too old to fight. You've crossed the Mediterranean now, heading deeper into Europe, into the court of France, where lace and lipstick rule, and power is often powdered and perfumed beyond recognition. It's a colder world in some ways, despite the velvet and wine and roses. Here, in the salons and boudoirs of Versailles, the art of womanhood is its own battlefield, and you're about to be armed not with steel but with silk, scent, and savage conversation. Your arrival is quiet. No trumpets, no procession, just a series of whispered names and a gloved hand gesturing you into a hallway that smells of beeswax and blooming lilies. You're not here as a noble, not quite. You're being trained, like so many before you, to navigate the treacherous waters of the French court, not as a lady, but as a femme d'esprit, a woman of spirit, wit, and tactical charm. Your new instructor is a woman known as Madame de Rosier. She's elegant in the way knives are elegant, perfectly balanced, polished to a shine, and undeniably dangerous. She wears a gown the colour of spilled ink and a face so composed you doubt it's ever cracked in laughter. You're not here to be pretty, she says, voice as dry as toast. You're here to become the most interesting person in the room, and the least threatening. And that's the paradox. You must be sharp, but not cutting. Amusing, but never a fool. Intelligent, but never more than the man beside you. Welcome to Versailles. Your training begins with conversation. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that moves in spirals. Political, philosophical, intimate. All while maintaining a dazzling smile and never letting your wine glass empty. You learn to speak without revealing your hand, to flatter without grovelling, to make your listener feel brilliant for having heard your cleverness. Madame de Rosier has you recite Voltaire one day, scandalous poetry the next, and finally an anecdote involving a duck, a wig, and a bishop. Now make it charming, she says. You do. Historical fact. In the salons of Enlightenment France, women were often the hosts and moderators of intellectual discussions. These salonières shaped political opinion, guided writers and philosophers, and indirectly influenced policy, all while bound by corsets and social codes. Their power was never overt, but it was real. Your next lesson is fashion, but not in the way you expect. You don't just learn to dress, you learn to send messages through fabric. You study silhouettes, fabric textures, sleeve lengths, and necklines. Each accessory has weight. A black ribbon around the throat whispers scandal. A slightly crooked brooch might signal flirtation or defiance. You begin to realize that a gown is not worn. It's deployed, and then comes the fan. Of course it does, but here it's practically a dialect of its own. You master the language. Fanning quickly means impatience, slowly, boredom. Snapping it closed means you're displeased. Touching it to your chin means flirtation. Your teacher warns you, use it like a sword, but smile so they never see the blood. There's perfume too. You already thought you understood scent, but Versailles takes it to extremes. Rooms are drowning in fragrance. Musk, rose, neroli, civet, powdered iris. You're taught how to lay a scent so that it rises subtly in heat, or lingers on a glove long after a handshake. One day, a noblewoman passes you and says, "Someone in this hallway smells like poetry." You don't turn around, but it's you. Fringe fact: court women often dabbed perfume not only on their pulse points, but on handkerchiefs, hairpieces, and even letters. One mistress of a duke was said to scent the corners of her gloves with ambergris so powerfully that servants fainted in her wake. You're not aiming for fainting, just fascination. You're also instructed in dance, but it's not for performance, it's for manoeuvring. At court functions, movement is everything. You learn how to pass through a room while brushing the right elbows and avoiding the wrong eyes, how to drop a curtsy just low enough to show grace but not submission, how to leave a room in such a way that people ask where you went, even if they didn't notice you arrive. Conversation is performance, but writing, that's where your voice sharpens. Madame de Rosier teaches you how to craft letters like spells, subtle, looping, vague enough to be denied, rich enough to suggest. You're taught how to seal wax with a signature press, how to hide intent inside an innocent turn of phrase. A lady never writes what she means, she says, but she always means what she writes. There's another girl, Celeste, who's already mastered this. She leaves notes tucked into books at the library, under trays in the powder room, folded into fans at dinner. No one can prove they're hers, but everyone reads them. One of them says, "To be interesting is not the same as being known." You fold it into your stocking, for luck. You attend your first salon dressed in dove-grey silk, your fan lightly scented, your mind full of carefully polished conversation. You don't speak first. You wait. You nod. You laugh. You say, "That reminds me of a Greek proverb," and when they lean in, you drop the proverb like a secret. It works. Of course it does. Still, there are risks. Too much wit, and you're labelled dangerous. Too little, and you're irrelevant. You watch another girl, Margot, misstep. She corrects a baron in public. Factually, she's right. Socially, she's doomed. By morning, no one remembers her name. Scholars argue endlessly over the role of women in Enlightenment courts. Were they pawns or players? Here's what you know. Influence can wear a corset. Power can drink from a crystal glass. A woman can be both brilliant and bound, and still find a way to steer the room without ever standing. Madame de Rosier finds you reading by candlelight one night, curled over a book of letters written by Madame de 𝒮𝓁𝑒𝓅. She places a ribbon beside your hand and says, "Use this to tie your letters from now on. You've earned being read." You nod, quietly stunned. It's not a title, not a crown, but it's more than praise. It's recognition. And so you fold your fan, smooth your gown, and take one final look at your reflection. Not to check your face, but to see who you've become. A woman not just of beauty or art or wit. A woman of design. The next border you cross isn't marked by a wall or a gate, but by rhythm. Drums, deep and alive, meet you before the land does. You've sailed down the West African coast now, through warm waters and red-gold sunsets, into the heart of a kingdom that moves to its own beat, both literally and politically. You've arrived in the royal court of the kingdom of Dahomey, and here, everything you thought you knew about power, femininity, and training is about to shift, radically. The palace is enormous, its walls made of packed earth and adorned with reliefs, symbols of war, fertility, ancestry, and protection. The women who walk through its gates do not step quietly. They march. They are not veiled, not painted, not hidden behind fans or phrases. They wear colour, indigo, ochre, crimson, and move with purpose. You've seen courts where beauty is calculated in whispers. Here, it's measured in presence, so you've come expecting refinement. What you find is resistance. Your guide is a woman named Danma. She stands at least a head taller than you, with arms corded in muscle and a gaze that could cut glass. She's part of the Mino, known outside Dahomey as the Dahomey Amazons, the elite all-female royal guard. You're not here to learn how to please, she tells you, folding her arms. You're here to learn how not to beg. Your lodging is plain but spotless. No mirrors, no perfumes, no ornamentation. "We strip everything first," says Adanma, "so you can see what's underneath." You're not sure if she means physically, emotionally, or culturally. You're about to find out. Your first training is with your body. Not dance, not poise, but stance. You're taught to plant your feet, to feel the earth through your heels, to breathe through your belly. Balance is everything. A woman who cannot root, 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓎 says, will be blown over at the first wind. And then comes movement, but not the kind you expect. You learn how to walk not for elegance, but for endurance. How to lift your knees higher, how to move quietly through underbrush, how to climb. You're not being trained for a banquet, you're being trained for the hunt. Historical fact. The 𝒮𝓄 women were not mythical figures, but real military forces within the kingdom of 𝒮𝓿𝑒𝓅, serving from the 17th to 19th centuries. They were trained in combat, strategy, and statecraft, and some even held command positions. Unlike in many societies, these women weren't supporting caste, they were frontline leaders. You don't carry a fan, you carry a blade. Yes, it's wooden for now, but the lessons are very real. You practice slashing, blocking, striking, all with rhythm. You move to drum beats that are faster than your breath, pushing your body until sweat runs like rain down your spine. Your arms ache, your legs cramp, you keep going, and yet, it isn't all about war. You're taught songs, long lilting verses sung in fon, each one a story of ancestors, warnings, pride. You learn call and response. You learn that a voice is a weapon too, and that memory lives in the mouth. Every girl must know the histories. Every girl must be able to stand before the queen and recite where she came from. There is no perfume, but there are herbs. You're taught which leaves soothe fever, which roots ease pain, which berries you must never eat. You spend time in the palace gardens with elder women, healers, midwives, spiritualists, who teach you the names of everything in whispers and then test you with silence. You pass, eventually, you remember. Fringe fact, the 𝒮𝓄 women took vows of celibacy while in service to the king, not out of piety, but to preserve focus and unity. They were considered married to the monarch symbolically, but functionally, they answered to no man. They controlled their own resources, lived in separate quarters, and were often feared even by male soldiers. You begin to understand that this place trains not seduction, not entertainment, but sovereignty. And sovereignty here is physical. One morning you're handed a carved wooden staff and told to dance, not for delight, but for initiation. The dance is sharp, grounded, driven by drums that mimic heartbeats and rainfall. You move in sync with others, stomping, turning, leaping. It feels like possession. It feels like history moving through you. Another night, you're brought to a firelit gathering. Not a party, an oral court. Women sit in a wide circle, each taking turns recounting a tale. Some stories are funny, others painful. You're told to listen, not just for words, but for lessons. One woman tells a story of a girl who followed a prince into the woods and returned with his sword and his title. Everyone laughs, but it doesn't feel like a joke. You're taught politics too, but differently, through observation. You watch how women in the Queen's inner circle discuss disputes, distribute food, negotiate trade routes. Power isn't announced, it's wielded through choice, through gesture, through memory. There's no makeup here, but there is strategy. A girl named 𝒮𝓄 becomes your closest companion. She teaches you how to wrap your hair in the royal style, how to hold your staff like it's part of your spine, how to respond when a visitor offers you gifts. You thank them with your eyes, not your hands. She says this after returning a bracelet with a glance so sharp it could have drawn blood. You're not taught to smile, you're taught to evaluate. One day, a man from a neighbouring kingdom visits. You're standing near the gate holding a bowl of water. He looks at you too long. You don't lower your gaze, you hold it. And after a moment he looks away. Later, 𝐻𝒾𝓈𝓉𝑜𝓇𝓐 tells you, you didn't flinch, that's better than perfume. Scholars love to debate whether the women of 𝒮𝓿𝓅 were truly free or simply made exceptions in a patriarchal structure. But standing here, sweat-drenched, staff in hand, listening to the crackle of fire and the low hum of ancestral songs, you don't care what the scholars say. This doesn't feel like an exception. It feels like a reminder that power can be trained, that grace can roar, that a girl doesn't have to wait to be chosen. She can choose herself. The wind is thinner up here, sharpened by altitude and the hush of isolation. You're in the mountains now, stone steps carved into cliffs, prayer flags fluttering like fractured rainbows across the sky. This is the Tibetan plateau, and you've come to a monastery. Not for meditation, not exactly. but for a form of training that's unlike anything you've encountered so far. There are no courts here. No perfume, no velvet, no veils, just cold stone, hot tea, and silence so complete it becomes a presence of its own. The women you meet don't smile immediately. They assess you the way mountains do, quietly, over time. You're not brought to a private chamber. You're brought to the kitchen. Your instructor is a nun named 𝒮𝓁𝑒𝓅, small and dry as a branch, her skin wind-burned, her robe the deep maroon of twilight. "We begin with fire," she says, handing you a brass kettle heavier than it looks. You're not sure if she means literally or metaphorically. It's probably both. This is not a harem. It's not a palace. And yet, in its own way, it has a court, a centre of gravity where decisions are made, rituals are followed, and every gesture carries weight. You're not here to learn seduction. You're here to understand discipline as a form of identity. Your first task is to make butter tea. It sounds simple. It is not. The yak butter must be churned correctly. The tea must be steeped just long enough. The salt must be added in precise amounts. You serve it to elders, to other nuns, to travellers who arrive with frostbitten lips. If the tea is wrong, 𝒮𝓁𝑒𝓅 says, they won't trust the rest of you. You drink your mistakes. They're frequent. The days here are carved into rhythm, rising before the sun, sweeping the stone corridors, practicing chants, hauling firewood. You're not treated delicately. That was never the point. Here, womanhood isn't refined. It's weathered. Historical fact. In Tibetan history, while the most prominent monastic leaders were male, there were many female practitioners, some cloistered, others itinerant, who held spiritual and sometimes political influence. Noble women often trained in Buddhist teachings to become spiritual advisors or consorts to high-ranking monks and kings, blending faith with courtly presence. One morning you're told to sit in the meditation hall for 6 hours. No talking, no moving, no sleeping. At first it feels like punishment. Then something clicks. Your mind quiets. Not completely, but enough. You realize the thoughts that used to push you forward are just noise. You don't need them all the time. You're not a performance. You're a witness. Later you're taught to walk the perimeter of the temple clockwise, reciting mantras. Not aloud at first, just inside your mouth, where breath becomes prayer. 𝒮𝓁𝑒𝓅 tells you, every step is the same distance from yourself. You don't fully get it, not yet. But you keep walking. Then comes the art of debate. Yes, debate. Monastic training includes the sharpening of the mind, and that means arguing, vigorously, respectfully, precisely. Two nuns stand across from each other, clapping their hands sharply to punctuate a point, questioning each other's logic. You're taught to respond not emotionally, but intelligently. Faith without clarity is superstition, 𝒮𝓁𝑒𝓅 says, and women are never allowed the luxury of confusion. You begin to participate. Your voice, once trained to whisper and smile, now rises with intent. You argue about compassion, about ego, about illusion. Your pulse races, but your feet stay grounded. You're not trying to win, you're trying to understand. Fringe fact. Some tantric Buddhist lineages included female practitioners who were revered not as mystics or muses, but as equals in spiritual development. They were called dakini, sky dancers, figures who embodied wisdom and transformation. Their presence was said to both elevate and challenge the practitioner. You wonder, quietly, if 𝒮𝓁𝑒𝓅 has ever been called that. In the evenings, the kitchen becomes warmer. You share food, simple barley soup, tea, no gossip, no flattery, just presence. There's a kind of intimacy in the quiet, one not built on touch or teasing, but on mutual solitude. You and the other women don't talk about where you came from. You don't need to, your feet are cracked, your hands are strong, that's enough.
Then one night, a traveler arrives, a young monk from a neighboring monastery. You're instructed to help host him. You serve tea, lower your eyes, but not in submission, just focus. He watches you closely, perhaps expecting flirtation. You give him nothing, not coldness, just stillness. And after a moment he smiles, not in conquest, but recognition. Not what I expected, he says. You nod. Exactly. 𝒮𝓁𝑒𝓅 sees the exchange and later hands you a small piece of parchment written in thick black ink. A single Tibetan phrase, you do not need to be fire to burn. You keep it in your sash. There's no fan here, no lace, no throne. but there's mastery of self, of stillness, of presence. You're taught to recognize illusion in others, and more importantly, in yourself. That the person you present is a costume, no matter how well tailored. That sometimes the most seductive thing in the world is someone who wants nothing from you at all. Scholars rarely write about this kind of training, the invisible kind, the interior kind. It doesn't make for easy narratives. It doesn't shimmer in candlelight or echo in marble halls. But you feel it growing in your bones, the ability to sit in silence and not shrink. To hear your name only once in a day and not crave more. To walk into a room and not wonder how you're seen, because you already know. Before you leave, 𝒮𝓁 braids your hair, slowly, carefully. It's the only time she touches you. The world will call what you've learned here useless, she says. They'll expect you to perform again, to smile, to lean in. She ties the braid with a scrap of crimson cloth. But you don't have to. You bow. Not because you're trained to, but because it feels right. And as you descend the mountain, wind biting at your sleeves, you realize you're not leaving courtly life behind. You're carrying it inside you. The road takes you downward now, away from the peaks, away from the silence, into the layered noise of medieval Europe. The chill of the Alps gives way to the damp weight of castle air, thick with candle smoke, chamber pot stench, and the faint clink of goblets being filled again and again. You arrive not in one particular kingdom, but in a general place, somewhere between England and France, between stone and soot, between the sacred and the scandalous. This is a world that smells of mildew and rose oil, of dog-eared prayer books and crumpled love letters. And here, in drafty halls and cloistered gardens, noble girls are being trained, not so much for sex, not directly, but for marriage. And marriage in this era is a deeply coded game of politics, patience, and theatrical chastity. You're brought to a small room in a sprawling, cold manor, walls lined with faded tapestries, floorboards bowed and groaning. The woman assigned to you as tutor is called Lady 𝐵𝓇𝒾𝓃, a widow whose voice has the cracked rhythm of someone who's repeated herself too often to too many reluctant ears. Your virginity is your weapon, she begins, without even looking up. But it must never feel like a threat. Lesson 1. You start with posture. You're taught to walk slowly, modestly, with your hands folded at your waist and your head tilted just enough to appear thoughtful, but never plodding. Your clothes are wool and linen, heavy with embroidery, but scratchy against the skin. Discomfort builds character, Lady 𝐵𝓇𝒾𝓃 mutters, or at least obedience. Unlike in other courts, here you are taught less about performance and more about restraint. Every lesson is an exercise in control. Speech is soft, eyes are lowered, smiles are minimal and well-timed. You're drilled in psalms, in Latin prayers, in genealogies of saints. You memorize the marriages of kings past and the scandals that nearly brought down their courts, cautionary tales delivered in hushed tones and tight-lipped warnings. Historical fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, noble girls were sent to convents as children, not permanently, but as a form of education and behavioral conditioning. These institutions taught reading, embroidery, music, religious devotion, and, subtly, how to conduct oneself in noble marriage. It was both a sanctuary and a waiting room. You spend weeks inside what feels like a fortress of expectation. Every move you make is measured against a future wedding night. Not that anyone talks about sex directly. That would be vulgar. Instead, they speak of virtue, of temperance, of obedience, words that carry weight like iron, though they're spoken in silk. You're taught to play the harp, to stitch samplers with tiny Latin verses, to pour wine with a demure bow of your head. You learn to ride side saddle, how to curtsy depending on rank, and how to read just enough to recognize your husband's land deeds, but not enough to question their terms. A younger girl, Elise, whispers that she heard one noblewoman was taught how to please her husband by a Spanish handmaid who used oranges to demonstrate. She's promptly slapped by the nursemaid and made to fast for 3 days. Lesson learned. Yet under all the lace and the lacing, there's tension. The noblemen may want their brides modest and silent, But they also expect them to bear sons, keep the castle in order, and not embarrass them at feasts. So, discreetly, Lady Odile shows you how to engage in conversation, how to speak just enough to seem clever, never challenging, how to hint at intelligence through poetry, never opinion. Men want wives who seem like mirrors, she says, until they look too closely. You study courtly love through songs and poems, verses that float through the manor like ghosts, always ending in longing. You learn that desire is best expressed in riddles, and that flirtation, when done correctly, is indistinguishable from prayer. He must want you, Lady Odile says, but think he found you first. Fringe fact, the chastity belt, often cited as a medieval device to protect virgins, is largely a myth. What was more common, and far more subtle, was behavioral engineering. Endless lessons on modesty, spiritual guilt, and social pressure so intense that many noble women entered marriage with no understanding of what awaited them beyond the veil. And still, whispers persist. Of maids who steal kisses in the kitchens, of secret letters tucked into prayer books, of visiting knights whose boots are found outside the wrong doors. Lady Odile hears them all and says nothing. But one morning she warns you. Curiosity is not a sin, but in a girl like you, it's a luxury you can't afford. There's another kind of training here too, an unspoken one. You learn to read silences, to notice which servants enter which rooms and how quickly they leave. You learn which noble daughters are being watched by whose mothers, and which women wear their hair down in ways that violate morning dress. All of it matters. Reputation is currency, and you're barely allowed to earn your own. You're also taught how to manage a household, how to instruct the steward, how to account for wool, barley, bread, how to negotiate with the abbey over tithes, how to secure a physician for the birthing chamber. These lessons are not glamorous, but they are vital. You're not being trained to be a lover. You're being trained to be a foundation. One evening, you're summoned to a feast, not to dine, but to watch. You're placed at the edge of the hall, in the corner, a symbol more than a participant. From there, you observe the noble wives, how they lift their goblets, how they correct their husbands, with a squeeze to the wrist instead of a word, how they leave just before the men become too drunk to remember their titles. And you begin to understand something. This training, it isn't just about restraint. It's about timing. Knowing when to hold your tongue, when to bend your neck, when to disappear, but also when to speak, when to stand, when to let your silence echo louder than a declaration. Scholars often dismiss the women of this era as passive, but you see now that survival required subtlety. Power moved under the surface like a stream beneath the floorboards, not flashy, but constant. Lady Odile gives you one final lesson before your name is added to the roster of marriageable. She hands you a silver mirror, cracked at one corner, and says, "You've been taught to be a vessel. But don't forget, mirrors reflect, sometimes more than they're meant to." You pack it quietly. Your training has left no scars, nothing visible, just the memory of hands folded, the curve of a curtsy, the practiced perfect pause before speaking, and the knowledge that sometimes the most dangerous women are the ones everyone assumes were never taught anything at all. The candles are taller now, and the rooms quieter. You've crossed the final threshold, into the courts of Renaissance Europe, where beauty is theology, and a single glance can change your fate. Florence, Venice, Paris, Vienna. It doesn't really matter. This final chapter belongs to all of them, stitched together by ambition and silk thread. You've arrived at the last stage of the journey, where the game becomes more subtle, and the stakes become impossible to ignore. Because now, some of the women being trained aren't content to serve the story. They want to write it. You're shown into a sunlit chamber with painted ceilings and books lining the walls. The woman waiting for you is not a governess, or a chaperone, or a duchess. She is a strategist. Her name is Contessa Sofia di Brienza, and she has lived 3 lives: courtesan, wife, widow. And she has emerged as something new entirely. "You're not here to become a wife," she says, pouring a glass of wine with unbothered elegance. "You're here to become a problem. It's not meant as a threat, it's an invitation. The training begins not with manners or movement, but with philosophy. You study Machiavelli, Ovid, and the Old Testament, not for faith, but for leverage. You're taught how to ask questions that sound innocent, but destabilize entire rooms. How to correct a prince without bruising his ego. How to let a man think you've revealed your secrets when you've only opened a drawer full of decoys. Gone are the days of silent service. Here, you're taught presence. How to command attention, not with loudness, but with gravity. When to walk into a salon in red silk, and when to wear widow's black just long enough to seem interesting. How to stage your life like a play, with tragedy, intrigue, and the promise of Act Two. Historical fact. In Renaissance Italy and France, some women rose beyond expected roles, becoming political advisors, art patrons, and even de facto rulers. Isabella d'Este, Caterina Sforza, and Diane de Poitiers wielded enormous influence from behind fans and inside bedchambers. Their education in the arts of courtship and survival were not for beauty, but for sovereignty. Contessa Sophia introduces you to the 4 pillars of power: reputation, influence, information, and mystery. She calls it the doctrine of veiled dominance. You commit them to memory. You learn languages, not just Italian and French, but body language. How to lean in just slightly. How to feign distraction to make someone chase your attention. How to appear moved by music, even when your mind is calculating alliances across the room. A room, Sophia tells you, is a battlefield, and your chair is your throne. Fringe fact. Many royal courts during the Renaissance used salonières and ladies-in-waiting, not merely as ornaments, but as informal intelligence agents. They overheard, recorded, and sometimes manipulated courtly decisions by knowing who was sleeping with whom, who owed money, and who might be quietly plotting. You practice writing letters, not to express emotion, but to control it. A single phrase, "I hope your health improves soon," can imply a dozen things depending on punctuation and paper. You're taught how to press your seal just light enough that the impression fades with time, in case the message must vanish. You attend masquerades. You're told they're not for fun. They're rehearsals for deception. Beneath your mask, you say things you're not supposed to, dance with someone you shouldn't, and test how far the boundary stretches before it breaks. You learn that power has a taste, and it's sweeter when you're not supposed to have it. You study art, not to paint, but to understand symbols. A pomegranate in a portrait, a dog underfoot, a gloved hand resting on an armrest. All of it, messages. You realize that some women have been speaking through paintings for centuries. You learn to read their silences. There's a girl training alongside you, Liane, from Provence. She's soft-voiced, with a face like spring and eyes like winter. You discover, after weeks, that she is illegitimate. Her future depends entirely on who finds her useful. "I'd rather be feared than admired," she says one night over wine. Admiration fades. Fear lingers. You don't argue. One afternoon, you watch Contessa Sophia write a letter in 5 different ways, each with the same sentence, each with a different outcome. "You're not manipulating," she tells you. "You're conducting. The chord is your orchestra. You just need to choose the melody." And just when you think you've seen it all, you attend a wedding. Not yours, yet, but a powerful one. You watch as the bride glides through the ceremony like a queen already. What you know, what the others don't, is that she negotiated her dowry herself, that she delayed the date by 2 months to ensure favorable treaties, that her father calls her stubborn, but the chancellor calls her indispensable. This is the new curriculum. Be underestimated. Let them call you graceful. Let them call you obedient. And then, when they least expect it, move the entire board. Scholars argue whether these women had true power. They still had to marry, they say, still had to play the role. But you understand now that power doesn't always mean walking in through the front gates. Sometimes it means owning the keys to the back door. Sometimes it means no one even knows it was you. On your last day of training, Contessa Sophia gives you a gift. A ring. Gold. Simple. with a tiny compartment under the stone. For poison, you ask, half joking. For secrets, she replies. Though sometimes those are the same thing. And you understand. You were trained not to serve, not to perform, not even to please. You were trained to endure, to observe, to calculate, and when the moment is right, to choose. Always to choose. Now, as you pack your silks and seal your final letter, you catch your reflection in the mirror and see someone else looking back. Not a girl, not a lady, a player. And the game is just beginning. So here you are, on the other side of history's velvet curtain, no longer just watching the dance, but understanding its choreography. 30 chapters, 30 mirrors held up to 30 different worlds, and the image they reflect back at you isn't soft or singular. It's fractured, complex, bruised, and beautiful. You've walked through marble palaces and mud brick temples, through tea houses, battlefields, monasteries, and dim-lit salons. Each time in the shoes of a girl, told to be something: ornament, vessel, virgin, weapon, queen. Each time you learned something new: how to stand, how to speak, when to be seen, when to vanish. You began in shadow, behind silken curtains, under the watchful eyes of eunuchs and priestesses. You learned early that power was never given. It was earned in glances, gestures, and lessons that were rarely named outright. You saw how girls became tools of empire, symbols of purity, bearers of royal lineage, and yet, even in those roles, found ways to bend the script without breaking it. You watched them flirt through poetry, protest through silence, and survive through knowing when to speak and when to listen. There was no singular way girls were trained for the royal courts, no universal curriculum. Some were taught music, others warfare. Some were instructed in the Kama Sutra by candlelight. Others were handed prayer beads and told to pray away their desire. But through it all, a pattern emerged: adaptation, not just to survive, but to steer, to negotiate the role written for them, and then, quietly, cleverly, to change the ending. You've seen the scholars debate it all. Were they victims? Were they architects? Were they prisoners of beauty or masters of the gaze? And the answer, frustrating as it is yes. All of the above. These girls, these women, lived in systems they didn't design. But some of them rewired the walls. Some of them became shadows that shifted history without ever getting their names carved into stone. And maybe now, as you lie here, fan tucked metaphorically under your chin, candle burned low, you carry just a little more of their stories inside you. Not as fantasy, not as fairy tale, but as fact. That power has always worn many faces, and one of them, always, has been feminine. Now, go ahead, dim the lights a little lower, pull the covers up, let your breath slow. And if your dreams wander into palaces or harems, into libraries or war tents, don't be surprised. Just remember, wherever you find her, behind the curtain, beneath the veil, with a blade or a prayer book in hand, she's not waiting to be rescued. She's waiting to be recognized.